Nothing ever changed. That was the entire problem. Long before anything you recognize existed, the world was completely frozen. Not frozen with ice or cold, but frozen in the sense that nothing ever moved forward. There was no past and no future because time itself did not exist. Grey fog covered everything. Massive trees called arch trees stretched endlessly into the mist. And above it all, the everlasting dragons ruled a kingdom where nothing would ever happen. These dragons were immortal. Their bodies were covered in stone scales that made them impossible to harm. They lived among the arch trees, watching over a world that would never grow or change or evolve. They had no enemies because there was no concept of conflict. They had no purpose because there was no concept of purpose. They simply existed in a landscape of grey stone and endless fog. The world had no light and no darkness, no heat and no cold, no life and no death. These opposites that define everything we understand did not exist yet. The universe was stuck in perfect balance, which sounds peaceful until you realize it means absolutely nothing could ever begin or end. Everything was the same. Everything stayed the same. Everything would always be the same. The dragons presided over this steady emptiness. The fog never lifted. The arch trees never grew taller or shorter. The stone crags never crumbled. Nothing decayed because decay requires time, and time was not flowing. The Age of Ancients was eternal in the truest sense of the word. Not eternal because it would last forever, but eternal because forever had no meaning when each moment was identical to the last. This was existence before existence really started, a world unformed, a world without any of the opposing forces that would eventually give it shape and meaning. No one was born and no one passed away. No one laughed and no one suffered. The dragons watched over a realm where the very concept of watching had no weight because nothing worth seeing would ever occur. The landscape stretched in every direction without variation. Grey fog blending into grey stone, ancient trees rising from the mist only to disappear back into it. Dragons perched on branches that had been there since before time began and would remain there until time itself was born. If you could have stood in that world, you would have felt the crushing weight of permanence. Everything around you screaming that this is how things are and this is how things will always be. But frozen states cannot last once the spark appears. Dead wood eventually finds flame. Still water eventually finds current. And timeless worlds eventually find the fire that will shatter them into pieces and force them to choose between light and shadow, between heat and cold, between the living and the departed. The Age of Ancients was about to end not with violence or rebellion, but with the simple appearance of something that had never existed before. Disparity was coming. Change was coming. And the dragons who had ruled forever in a world without time were about to discover what it means when forever finally runs out. Something appeared in the darkness that had never been there before. Deep beneath the surface of the unchanging world, a fire sparked to life. This was not an ordinary flame. This was the first flame. A primordial fire that carried within it the power to break the eternal stalemate. And with that single spark, everything that had been frozen for eternity suddenly began to move. The first flame brought something the world had never known: disparity. For the first time, there were opposites. Heat existed, which meant cold had to exist as well. Light appeared, which created the concept of dark. Life began to stir, which introduced the possibility of death. These opposing forces crashed into a universe that had only ever known sameness, and the impact shattered the old order completely. Time itself started flowing. Where before there had been only an endless moment stretching in all directions, now there was a past and a present and a future. The fog began to shift. The arch trees stood witness to genuine change for the first time in their existence. The world was no longer frozen. It was alive. It was moving. It was becoming something new. But the first flame held more than just the power to start time and create opposites. Within its depths burned souls of tremendous power. These were the Lord's souls, condensed essences of the flame itself that granted whoever claimed them strength beyond measure. And in the shadows of this newborn fire, certain beings were drawn to these souls like moths, to a light they had never seen before. The first to claim a Lord's soul was Nito. He would become known as Gravelord Nito, the first of the dead. The soul he found was the soul of death itself. In a world that had never experienced endings, Nito now commanded the very concept of finality. His power was dark and absolute, giving him dominion over everything that would eventually cease to be. The second was the Witch of Izalith. She claimed a Lord's soul that granted mastery over life and flame. When Nito controlled death, the witch could nurture life and command fire. Her soul burned with creative energy, the kind that could birth entire civilizations or reduce them to ash depending on her will. The third was Gwyn. He would become the Lord of Sunlight, and the soul he claimed was the most powerful of them all. His Lord's soul radiated with brilliant light, so bright it could pierce through the grey fog that had covered the world since before time began. Gwyn's power was not just immense, it was defining. It was the kind of strength that could reshape the entire world. But there was a fourth soul, a unique one that almost no one would remember. A small figure emerged from the depths near the flame. This was the furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten that history would barely acknowledge his existence. But the soul he claimed was special. It was the dark soul, an essence tied to the shadows that light created. Where the other Lord souls burned bright and obvious, the dark soul was quiet and hidden, and it would play a role in the fate of every human who would ever live, though none of them would understand why for ages to come. These four beings stood as the first lords of a new age. Nito with his command over death, the witch with her power over life and flame, Gwyn with his overwhelming light, and the forgotten pygmy with his dark soul tucked away in the shadows. They had claimed the power of the first flame, and in doing so, they became something close to gods. The Age of Ancients was ending. The dragons still sat on their arch trees, still wrapped in their stone scales, still believing their eternal reign would continue. But they did not yet understand what had changed. They did not realize that time was now flowing, that opposites now existed, and that four beings had just claimed the power to challenge a kingdom that had stood since before standing meant anything. The world had been grey fog and stone and silence. Now it had fire. Now it had time. Now it had beings powerful enough to imagine something different. An imagination, once it appears, cannot be extinguished. The first flame had ignited not just in the depths of the earth, but in the hearts of those who found it. The age of disparity had truly begun. The dragons would soon learn what happens when nothing can stay the same forever. The lords wanted more than power. They wanted the world itself. Gwyn looked at the everlasting dragons sitting on their arch trees and made a decision that would reshape everything. These immortal creatures had ruled since before time began, but now time was flowing, and the lords had strength the dragons could not imagine. Gwyn decided the Age of Dragons was over. He would make sure of it personally. He raised an army unlike anything the world had seen. Knights joined his cause, and Gwyn blessed them with his Lord Soul's power. Lightning crackled through their armor and weapons. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were warriors infused with the raw energy of sunlight itself, capable of bringing thunder down on their enemies with every strike. But Gwyn knew he could not win alone. He formed an alliance with the other Lord Soul Bearers. Nito agreed to bring his armies of the undead, creatures touched by death itself. The Witch of Izalith pledged her daughters and their mastery over flame. Together, these lords launched a war against the dragons for dominion over the entire world. The war against the dragons began, and it was catastrophic from the very first battle. The problem was simple and terrible. Dragon scales were nearly indestructible. These stone plates that covered every dragon's body had protected them since the Age of Ancients, and conventional weapons could not pierce them. Gwyn's soldiers fought bravely, hurling spears and firing arrows, but the dragons shrugged off attacks that would have leveled mountains. For every dragon that fell, dozens of Gwyn's knights perished. The cost was staggering. The war seemed unwinnable. Then everything changed because of a traitor. Seath, the Scaleless, was born different from his dragon brethren. He had no stone scales covering his pale white body. This defect made him vulnerable where other dragons were immortal. His own kind looked down on him. They saw him as lesser, as weak, as something that did not belong among the everlasting. That rejection would cost them everything. Seath approached Gwyn with information that would turn the entire war around. He revealed the secret his fellow dragons had kept since before memory. The scales were not just armor. They were the source of dragon immortality itself. Break the scales, and you break their claim to eternal life. Destroy the scales, and the dragons could finally be defeated. Gwyn seized on this knowledge immediately. He was the Lord of Sunlight, and sunlight carried within it the power of lightning. Using his Lord's soul, Gwyn learned to forge lightning into weapons. Not ordinary lightning that flashes and fades. This was concentrated thunder, shaped into bolts that could splinter stone. He armed his knights with lightning spears that crackled with electricity. He gave his archers great bows that fired arrows wreathed in storm energy. The next battle was completely different. Gwyn's knights struck with thunderous force, and for the first time, dragon scales cracked. The stone armor that had protected these creatures since the beginning of everything shattered under lightning strikes. The dragons roared in shock and pain as their immortality peeled away piece by piece. But Gwyn was not done. He coordinated attacks with his allies to maximize the devastation. The Witch of Izalith and her daughters of Chaos unleashed firestorms across the battlefield. Massive columns of flame rose into the sky, burning so hot they set the ancient arch trees themselves ablaze. Dragons trying to escape through the air found themselves caught in infernos that cooked them alive. The trees they had perched on for eons became funeral pyres. Gravelord Nito added his own horror to the war. Once Gwyn's lightning broke through the scales, Nito's power could reach the flesh beneath. He unleashed clouds of death and disease that seeped into the dragons' exposed bodies. Their blood turned to poison. Their organs began to rot from the inside. Dragons that had never known sickness suddenly felt their bodies decaying while they still lived. Even Gwyn's firstborn son joined the battle. This was the god of war, Gwyn's eldest child, fighting alongside his father with pride and fury. He threw lightning spears with such force that dragons fell from the sky like stones. Each throw brought down another of the everlasting, and the son proved himself worthy of his father's legacy. There were others in this war that history would forget. The furtive pygmy commanded armies of early humans, forced into battle by the gods who saw them as tools. These humans forged weapons, empowered by the dark soul, and fought as ringed knights, clad in armor and wielding swords infused with shadow. They played their part in bringing down the dragons. But when the war ended, the gods erased their contributions from every record. The humans who helped win the war would never be remembered for it. The battles raged across the world. Dragons fell one by one as their scales were stripped away and their bodies succumbed to lightning, fire, and decay. The immortal became mortal. The everlasting discovered what it meant to end. And Gwyn stood at the center of it all, directing his forces with the tactical brilliance of someone who understood this was not just a war but the birth of a new age. Eventually, the dragons were all but exterminated. A few managed to hide or escape. One stone dragon retreated to the depths of Ash Lake, so far removed from the world that even Gwyn's forces could not find it. Seth survived because he had sided with Gwyn from the beginning. But the rest were gone, slain, scattered, erased from a world that no longer belonged to them. The Age of Ancients ended not with quiet acceptance, but with fire and lightning and death. The world that had been grey fog and unchanging stone was now scarred by war. Burned arch trees stood as monuments to what had been lost. The ashes of dragons mixed with the soil of a transformed landscape. Gwyn and his allies stood victorious. They had challenged the oldest power in existence and won. The first flame burned brightly, and its light spread across a world no longer ruled by scales and stone. The Age of Fire was beginning, and Gwyn would make certain it was an age of glory, an age of prosperity, an age where the gods reigned supreme and the memory of dragons faded into legend. The Lord of Sunlight had claimed his throne, and he would build a kingdom worthy of the power he wielded. Victory gave Gwyn the chance to build something that had never existed before. With the dragons defeated and the world reshaped by war, the Lord of Sunlight turned his attention to creation instead of destruction. He chose a location high above the world and began constructing a city that would stand as proof of everything the Age of Fire represented. This was Anor Londo, the city of the gods, and it would become the most magnificent place ever built. White granite formed the foundations and walls. Towers stretched toward the sky as if trying to touch the sun itself. Massive cathedrals and grand halls filled the cityscape, each one designed to inspire awe in anyone who saw them. Sunlight bathed every street and courtyard, reflecting off the pale stone until the entire city seemed to glow. This was not just architecture. This was a statement. The Age of Fire had arrived, and its capital would shine brighter than anything that came before. Gwyn's Lord Soul gave him the power to populate his new kingdom with beings worthy of living there. Deific creatures joined him in Anor Londo, forming a pantheon of gods who would rule over the world below. His family stood at the center of this divine assembly. His allies from the war took their places as well, and to protect it all, Gwyn created an army of silver knights, elite warriors clad in gleaming armor who swore absolute loyalty to their lord. The Age of Fire brought something the world had never known during the Age of Ancients: prosperity, growth, purpose. Humans and other races looked up at Anor Londo and saw gods walking among the clouds. They built their own kingdoms in the lands below, but they built them in service to the deities above. Religion formed around the power of souls and the light of the first flame. Economies developed based on collecting and trading these souls. The entire structure of civilization centered on what Gwyn and the other lords had established. Gwyn took the title he had earned through war, Lord of Sunlight, God King of this new age. His authority was absolute and unchallenged. But he did not rule alone. His children joined him as part of the divine royal family. Guinevere was his first daughter, radiant and beloved. She became known as a goddess of fertility and bounty, representing the life-giving aspects of the Age of Fire. Her presence in Anor Londo symbolized growth and abundance. People prayed to her for good harvests and healthy children. Gwyndolin was his last-born son, though Gwyn raised him as a daughter because of his strong connection to the moon rather than the sun. This younger child possessed power over moonlight and illusion, abilities that set him apart from his father's solar dominance. Gwyndolin's role in the pantheon was quieter, but no less important. And there was the firstborn son, the god of war, who had fought alongside Gwyn during the dragon battles, throwing lightning spears that brought down the everlasting. At this point in history, he still lived in Anor Londo as the heir apparent, though his story would take a darker turn in time. Together, this family formed the core of divine power, the royal line of gods. Their authority stretched across the known world, and no one dared question their right to rule. But Gwyn understood that even gods needed allies to maintain order. He divided the world among those who had helped him achieve victory, rewarding loyalty and ensuring everyone had their place in the new hierarchy. Gravelord Nato descended into the deep places beneath the earth. He made his domain in the catacombs, a vast network of tombs and bone-filled passages. As the Lord of Death, Nato watched over the remains of everyone who passed away. His power ensured that death itself remained under divine control, part of the natural order rather than chaos. The Witch of Izalith claimed the underground realm that would bear her name. She and her daughters settled in this deep city, using their lord's soul to develop fire sorceries more advanced than anything seen during the war. Their flames could create and destroy in equal measure. Izalith became a center of magical learning and experimentation, all under the witch's careful guidance. Seath, the Scaleless, received special recognition for his betrayal of the dragons. Gwyn awarded the albino dragon the title of Duke, elevating him to noble status despite not being born a god. A grand archive was constructed for Seath's use, filled with countless texts and artifacts for his sorcerous research. The dragon who had been rejected by his own kind found acceptance and honor among the victors. Some stories even suggest Gwyn arranged for Seath to marry into the royal bloodline, cementing his position in the new order. But Gwyn went further to secure his kingdom's future. He took his own lord's soul, already the most powerful of all the souls claimed from the First Flame, and broke off fragments to distribute among trusted allies. One piece went to Seath, reinforcing the Duke's loyalty and power. Another fragment was given to the 4 kings of New Londo, human lords who Gwyn elevated to positions of authority over a great city in the east. Even after giving away these portions, Gwyn's soul remained immensely strong. The amount of power he possessed seemed limitless. To protect himself and his kingdom directly, Gwyn appointed 4 warriors to serve as his personal guardians. These were the 4 Knights of Gwyn, and each one was a legend even among the divine. Dragonslayer Ornstein led them as captain. This master spearman had a reputation for absorbing the strength of enemies he defeated, growing more powerful with each victory. His skill with the lightning spear was unmatched, and his loyalty to Gwyn was absolute. Knight Artorius the Abyss Walker was an unparalleled swordsman who feared nothing, not even the darkness that lurked at the edges of the world. He would venture into the abyss itself if duty called, armed with his greatsword and his unshakable will. Hawkeye Guff was a giant of a man whose skill with the great bow had brought down countless dragons during the war. His arrows could strike targets so far away that others could not even see them. His strength and precision made him invaluable to Gwyn's defense. Lord's Blade Shirin was the only woman among the four, but her deadliness surpassed many warriors twice her size. She wielded twin blades with lethal grace, serving as Gwyn's assassin when situations required a quieter approach. Her devotion to protecting the Lord's honor knew no limits. Each of these knights received a special enchanted ring and responsibilities befitting their station. They were not just bodyguards. They were symbols of Gwyn's power and the strength that protected the Age of Fire from any who might threaten it. Under this protection, under Gwyn's leadership, under the light of the first flame, civilization flourished. Humans built their kingdoms in the lands below Anor Londo. They worshipped the gods who watched over them from the city in the clouds. They lived according to laws and customs that reflected the divine order Gwyn had established. The world had structure, it had meaning, it had purpose. This was the Golden Age, the time when the Age of Fire burned brightest and the gods seemed eternal. Everything Gwyn had fought for during the war with the dragons had been realized. He sat on his throne in Anor Londo, surrounded by family and allies and loyal knights, ruling over a world transformed by light. But nothing burns forever, and the brighter a flame burns, the faster it consumes its fuel. The Age of Fire had begun in glory, but the seeds of its ending had been planted the moment the first flame sparked to life. Gwyn just did not know it yet. There was one Lord's soul that nobody talked about. While Gwyn built his shining city and the other lords claimed their domains, the fourth soul remained in the hands of someone the gods would rather forget. The furtive pygmy was small and easily overlooked. He did not build grand kingdoms or command armies of knights. He did not seek recognition or demand tribute from those around him. But the soul he claimed from the first flame was just as powerful as any other, and what he did with it would shape the future of every human who would ever live. The dark soul was different from the others. Where Gwyn's soul radiated light, and Nito's commanded death, and the witches controlled life and flame, the dark soul represented something quieter and more mysterious. It was tied to the shadows that light creates, to the darkness that exists as the opposite of fire. And instead of hoarding this power for himself, the pygmy made a choice that set him apart from the other lords. He divided the dark soul into fragments, countless tiny pieces, each one carrying a spark of the original. These fragments became known as humanity, small black sprites that contained the essence of the dark soul within them. The pygmy gave these fragments to his descendants, spreading the power among many rather than keeping it for one. This act created the human race itself. Every person born from that point forward carried a piece of the dark soul inside them, a fragment of shadow wrapped in flesh. This made humans unique in ways even they did not understand. They were frail compared to the gods. Their bodies were weak and their lives were short. But the potential locked within each fragment was immense. Humans could grow and change in ways that divine beings could not. They had a connection to the abyss, that primordial darkness that existed before the first flame brought light. The dark soul gave humanity the capacity for tremendous power, even if that power remained dormant for now. As the Age of Fire took hold, humans multiplied across the world. They built settlements and formed communities. And when the gods went to war against the dragons, humans joined the fight. Many were conscripted, forced into service by divine decree. They forged weapons, empowered by the dark soul's influence, and fought as ringed knights, contributing to the victory that reshaped the world. But when the war ended, their role was erased. The gods struck every mention of human participation from the historical record. The story of the war became a tale of divine triumph, with no acknowledgement of the humans who bled and suffered to make that triumph possible. Gwyn noticed this. He saw humans growing in number and spreading across his new world. He understood what the fragments of the dark soul represented: limitless potential, the capacity to rival even the gods if given enough time to develop, and that potential terrified him. The dark soul threatened everything Gwyn had built. The Age of Fire was meant to be eternal, a golden age ruled by light and order. But the dark soul represented the opposite. It was tied to darkness, to the natural progression toward an age where light would fade and shadow would rise. If humans ever realized their full potential, they could overthrow the divine order entirely. They could claim the world for themselves. Gwyn could not allow that possibility to exist, but he also could not simply destroy humanity without risking the stability he had worked so hard to create. So he approached the problem with the same strategic mind he had used to defeat the dragons. He would control humans through diplomacy and careful manipulation, making them believe they were honored while actually being contained. After the war ended, Gwyn gathered the surviving pygmy lords and presented them with what seemed like a generous gift. He gave them the Ringed City, a magnificent haven at the very edge of the world. This city was beautiful and isolated, far from Anor Londo and the centers of divine power. It would be a home for the pygmies and their people, a place where they could live in peace and prosperity. To seal this pact, Gwyn sent his youngest daughter, Filianora, to the Ringed City. She would serve as a guardian and a symbol of the bond between gods and humans. Gwyn promised he would return for her one day, a vow that suggested he valued this alliance and cared about the humans he was gifting this city to. But the truth was darker. The Ringed City was not a reward. It was a cage. By placing the pygmy lords and their most powerful followers at the edge of the world, Gwyn ensured they could not interfere with his rule. They were contained, isolated, kept far from the halls of power where decisions about the world were made. The dark soul and its potential remained locked away where it could not threaten the Age of Fire. Gwyn went further. He rewrote history itself. Every record of the pygmies' role in claiming a lord's soul was erased or obscured. References to human warriors in the Dragon War were struck from the annals. The furtive pygmy became so forgotten that even his name vanished from memory. Humanity's contributions and their connection to the dark soul became secrets that almost no one knew. This ensured that humans themselves would not understand their own potential. They would live as subjects of the gods, never realizing they carried power that could reshape the world. But even these measures were not enough for Gwyn. The dark soul still existed within every human, dormant but present. As long as that fragment remained accessible, the threat persisted. So Gwyn took the most drastic action of all. Using the power of the first flame itself, Gwyn branded humanity with a mark that would define them forever. The Dark Sign. A literal ring of fire burned into the soul of every human being. This was not a visible mark on their skin. It was deeper, branded onto the essence of what they were. The Dark Sign acted as a seal, a shackle that locked away the true power of the dark soul fragments within them. With the Dark Sign burned into their souls, humans became truly mortal. They were bound to the light of the flame, unable to access the darkness that gave them their potential. They lived brief lives and died final deaths, their existence fleeting compared to the immortal gods who ruled over them. The power that might have allowed them to rival divine beings remained sealed away, inaccessible behind a barrier of fire. Humans accepted this as natural. They did not know any different. They worshipped the gods, built their kingdoms according to divine law, and lived their short lives without questioning why things were this way. The dark sign felt like part of what it meant to be human, not a curse placed upon them by someone who feared what they could become. But curses have consequences that stretch far beyond their initial purpose. The dark sign that Gwyn created to protect his Age of Fire would eventually become the source of the world's greatest crisis. When the first flame began to fade, when the light that powered the dark sign started to weaken, that mark would twist into something terrible. It would become the undead curse, transforming death from an ending into an endless cycle of resurrection and decay. For now, though, in the early days of the Age of Fire, the curse remained dormant. Humans lived and served and died without trouble. They had no memory of the pygmy who gave them their souls. They had no knowledge of the power locked within them. They existed exactly as Gwyn wanted them to exist, controlled, contained, kept safely beneath the authority of the gods. The furtive pygmy faded into obscurity, remembered by no one. His choice to divide the dark soul and create humanity would have consequences that rippled through ages, but those consequences would only become clear when the fire began to die. For now, his legacy was hidden, his name forgotten, his very existence erased from history. Gwyn had secured his Age of Fire. The dark soul was contained. Humanity was under control. Everything seemed perfect in the kingdom of light, but the seeds of the ending had been planted. The dark sign would not remain dormant forever, and when it awakened, the world would learn the true cost of trying to suppress the darkness that lives in every human heart. The Age of Fire was supposed to last forever, but nothing lasts forever. Time passed in Gwyn's kingdom, and despite all the prosperity and glory, something fundamental began to change. The first flame started to fade. The source of all the Lord's power, the fire that had sparked disparity and time itself, was growing dimmer. This was not obvious at first. The dimming happened gradually, over years and decades, but those who understood what to look for could see the signs. The flame that had seemed eternal was consuming itself, burning through its fuel with each passing age. The Witch of Izalith noticed. Down in her underground city, surrounded by her daughters and their fire sorceries, she watched the flame's light weaken. Fear gripped her. If the first flame died completely, the Age of Fire would end. Everything the Lords had built would crumble. The power they wielded would vanish. An Age of Dark might rise to replace the world they knew. The witch could not accept that possibility. She conceived a plan that seemed brilliant in its simplicity. If the first flame was fading, she would create a new one. She possessed a Lord soul that granted mastery over life and flame. Surely that power could replicate what the first flame had done. She would use her soul to birth a second flame, one strong enough to rekindle the Age of Fire and preserve everything they had achieved. Her daughters could help. Together, they would save the world from darkness. The witch began her experiment in the depths of Izalith. She gathered her power and attempted to forge a new first flame, using her Lord's soul as the catalyst. Fire erupted from her magic, growing larger and hotter than she had anticipated. But something went wrong immediately. The flame she created was not like the first flame. It was twisted, corrupted, alive in ways that fire should never be alive. The flame of chaos burst forth from her spell, and it was completely uncontrollable. This fire did not just burn, it mutated everything it touched. It twisted life and flame together into forms that violated the natural order. The witch tried to contain it, tried to control what she had unleashed, but the chaos flame overwhelmed her completely. It consumed her body and transformed her into something that was no longer a person or even a god. She became the bed of chaos, a writhing mass of roots and branches and fire, more plant than woman, more monster than deity. Her consciousness remained somewhere inside the horror she had become, but she could not control what was happening. The bed of chaos grew rapidly, spreading through Izalith like a cancerous growth, and from this twisted fusion of fire and life, new creatures began to emerge. Chaos demons spawned from the bed of chaos in waves. These were not natural beings. They were warped creations born from fire and life forced together in ways that should never have been possible. Some looked like molten stone, given legs and arms. Others were flying horrors with bat wings and burning bodies. Each demon was different, each one a unique abomination, shaped by the chaotic flame that birthed it. The witch's own daughters were caught in the eruption. The chaos flame spread through Izalith faster than anyone could escape. Some daughters were burned instantly, their bodies consumed by fire. Others were deformed, mutated into monstrous versions of themselves. Only a handful managed to flee before the chaos reached them. Quilana, one of the witch's daughters, escaped to the surface world. She would carry the guilt of surviving, while her mother and sisters were destroyed by the very power they had tried to wield. The demons did not stay contained in Izalith. They poured out from the underground city, spreading across the world like a plague. These creatures had no purpose beyond destruction and feeding on whatever they encountered. They were mindless products of corrupted flame, driven by instinct rather than thought, and they threatened everything the lords had built, just as the dragons once had. Gwyn heard reports of the catastrophe and mobilized his forces immediately. He had defeated the dragons. He would defeat the demons as well. This was his world, his age of fire, and he would not let some failed experiment destroy it. He gathered his knights and prepared for war once again. The Silver Knights of Anor Londo marched to Izalith in full force. These were Gwyn's elite warriors, the finest soldiers in his entire kingdom. Their armor gleamed in the sunlight as they descended toward the chaos below. They carried weapons blessed by lightning and divine power. They had fought dragons and won. Surely they could contain whatever the witch had unleashed. The battle that followed was unlike anything they had experienced. The demons came at them in endless waves, each one burning with the chaos flame. The heat was unbearable. The air itself seemed to scorch their lungs with every breath. The knights fought bravely, cutting down demon after demon, but for every creature they slew, more emerged from the depths of Izalith. The infernal fires did something worse than simply burning the knights. The chaos flame was so intense that it permanently charred their gleaming silver armor. The metal turned black, scorched by heat that refused to fade even after the battles ended. These silver knights became something different. They became the Black Knights, their once shining armor now dark as coal, forever marked by the fires they had fought. The knights pushed deeper into Izalith, seeking the source of the demons. They found the bed of chaos at the city's heart, a massive twisted growth that spawned new creatures constantly. They attacked it with everything they had. Lightning spears struck the roots, divine weapons carved into the branches. But the bed of chaos would not fall. It was sustained by the witch's lord soul, fused with the chaotic flame in a way that made it effectively immortal. Gwyn's forces could not destroy what the witch had become. The bed of chaos simply would not stop existing no matter how much damage they inflicted. The battle reached a stalemate. The Black Knights had slain countless demons, but more kept spawning. The chaos could not be killed, only contained. Gwyn made the difficult decision to retreat. His knights pulled back from the depths of Izalith, establishing a perimeter that would keep most demons trapped underground. They could not win this war through direct combat. The best they could achieve was preventing the demons from spreading further. Some demons were captured or tamed, pressed into service for the gods. The bat-winged demons that would later transport people to Anor Londo came from this group. But most remained wild, trapped in the ruins of Izalith. The Chaos Flame continued to burn without control. It turned entire regions into hellscapes of lava and ash. The landscape itself was scarred by what the witch had unleashed. Areas that had once been forests or meadows became volcanic wastelands. Izalith transformed from a grand underground city into a place of torment and flame. The witch's Lord Soul, one of the 4 great souls claimed from the first flame, was now fused with the bed of chaos. It could not be retrieved unless someone managed to destroy the horror she had become. That task seemed impossible. The Black Knights had failed. No one else seemed capable of ending what the witch had started. The scars of this disaster would remain visible for centuries. Demons continued to spawn from the bed of chaos, though at a slower rate than during the initial outbreak. They wandered Lordran, dangerous remnants of a failed attempt to preserve the Age of Fire. The Black Knights, their armor forever blackened, became wandering soldiers without a clear purpose, haunted by what they had witnessed in the depths. And the first flame continued to fade. The witch's attempt to rekindle it had only made things worse. She had added chaos and demons to the list of threats facing the Age of Fire. Gwyn's kingdom still stood, but cracks were beginning to show. The world he had built through victory over the dragons was being tested in ways he had not anticipated. And somewhere deep beneath the surface, in the burning ruins of Izalith, the bed of chaos continued to spawn horrors that would plague the world until someone finally found a way to put an end to the witch's terrible mistake. Gwyn believed he could trust humans if he chose the right ones. The chaos disaster had shown him that even gods could make terrible mistakes. The witch's failure demonstrated that the Age of Fire was more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. But Gwyn still needed to maintain control over the growing human population. His solution was to elevate certain humans to positions of power, creating loyal vassals who would help him govern while keeping their own kind in check. In the eastern lands near Anor Londo, a great human city had been constructed in a valley below the divine capital. This was New Londo, and it represented something new in the Age of Fire. A human kingdom built with divine blessing, designed to show that humans could achieve greatness under the guidance of the gods. 4 human lords ruled this city together. They were known as the 4 Kings of New Londo, and Gwyn had personally chosen them for their wisdom, nobility, and ambition. These were not ordinary humans. They were exceptional individuals who had proven themselves worthy of trust and authority. Gwyn decided they deserved rewards befitting their station. He took a shard of his own Lord's soul and gave it to the 4 kings. This was an enormous gesture. Gwyn had already distributed pieces of his soul to Seath and others, but giving power to humans was different. It showed that Gwyn believed these kings could be partners in maintaining the Age of Fire. Along with the soul fragment, the 4 kings received magical rings and prestigious titles that marked them as divinely appointed rulers. Under their leadership, New Londo prospered. The city grew into a thriving center of human civilization. Its people lived well, protected by their kings and blessed by divine favor. Trade flourished, culture developed. For a time, New Londo stood as proof that humans and gods could work together in harmony. The 4 kings remained loyal vassals, governing according to the principles Gwyn had established. But the fragment of the Lord's soul changed them over time. Power has a way of corrupting even the noblest intentions, and the four kings began to hunger for more than what they had been given. They wondered what other secrets the gods were keeping from them. They questioned why humans should serve gods when they possessed pieces of divine power themselves. Into this uncertainty came a voice from the darkness. Dark Stalker Carthy was one of the primordial serpents, ancient beings that had existed since before the Age of Fire began. Unlike Frampt, who served Gwyn's interests, Carter believed the Age of Fire was a mistake. He sought to bring about an Age of Dark, when humans would claim their rightful place as rulers of the world. And he saw the four kings as perfect tools to advance his agenda. Carty approached the kings with offers they could not refuse. He taught them secrets about the dark soul that Gwyn had deliberately hidden. He showed them how to steal humanity from their own subjects, draining the dark fragments from other humans to increase their own power. He promised that they could become dark lords themselves, rulers of an age that would outlast the fading fire. The kings listened. The temptation was too strong to resist. They began practicing the techniques Carty taught them, learning to drain humanity from others through an art called life drain. Their noble intentions twisted into greed and darkness. They stopped seeing their subjects as people to protect and started viewing them as resources to exploit. Their most loyal knights followed them into corruption. These warriors became the first dark wraiths, spectral figures who served the four kings by harvesting humanity from the living. They wore dark armor and wielded weapons infused with shadow. Their purpose was no longer to defend New Londo, but to feed their masters' growing hunger for power. As the four kings fell deeper into darkness, something worse began to happen. The abyss started to seep into New Londo itself. The abyss was primordial darkness given form, a manifestation of the shadow that existed before light. It corrupted everything it touched, turning solid ground into bottomless void and warping living creatures into monsters. The fragment of Gwyn's soul that the kings possessed became tainted by their embrace of the abyss, creating a nexus of dark power at the heart of the city. New Londo began to change. Dark tendrils spread through the streets. Citizens reported seeing shadows move with malicious intent. The dark wraiths hunted openly, draining humanity from anyone they encountered. The corruption grew stronger every day, feeding on itself as more people fell to the darkness. The city that had once represented the best of human achievement under divine guidance became a nightmare of abyssal infection. Reports of what was happening reached those who still held some loyalty to the old ways. Ingward and several other healers who served the city realized the truth. New Londo was lost. The abyss had consumed it from within, and if nothing was done, the corruption would spread beyond the city's walls. Eventually, it would threaten all of Lordran, perhaps even reaching Anor Londo itself. They faced an impossible choice: save the city and risk losing the entire kingdom, or sacrifice New Londo to contain the abyss. There was no third option. The four kings had doomed their own people the moment they accepted Caith's teachings. Ingward and the other sealers made their decision. They would flood New Londo, drowning the abyss before it could spread further. The city had been built in a valley with water controlled by massive dam gates. Breaking those gates would send a torrent of water cascading through the streets, submerging everything beneath cold depths. Every person still living in New Londo would perish. Tens of thousands of innocent lives would end in moments. But those deaths might save millions more. The sealers broke the dam gates. Water crashed into New Londo with terrible force, flooding through buildings and streets faster than anyone could escape. Humans drowned in their homes. Dark wraiths were swept away by the current. Even demons that had taken refuge in the city were consumed by the rising water. The flood showed no mercy and made no distinctions between innocent and guilty. In minutes, New Lundo transformed from a living city into a waterlogged tomb. The streets disappeared beneath murky water. Buildings stood as empty shells, their windows dark and lifeless. Bodies drifted in the current, trapped forever in the moment of their drowning. The city became a mass grave holding an entire civilization. The four kings survived, but not as they had been. The abyss had already claimed them so completely that physical death meant nothing. They became spectral entities bound to the dark void at the bottom of New Lundo, no longer truly alive, but unable to move beyond the prison the flood had created. The water and the seals placed by Ingwood trapped them below, containing the abyss but not destroying it. The city remained submerged. Its ghosts wandered the ruins, restless spirits of those who had drowned in the flood. These phantoms could not be harmed by ordinary means and attacked anything living that entered their domain. New Lundo became a place of horror, avoided by all who knew its history. The flood had succeeded in its purpose. The abyss was contained within the city's boundaries, prevented from spreading to the wider world. But the cost was staggering. An entire human kingdom had been sacrificed. Thousands of lives had been spent to stop a corruption that began with 4 men who wanted more power than they deserved. Carthy retreated into the shadows, his plans momentarily thwarted but not abandoned. The dark wraiths who survived scattered, waiting for another opportunity to serve their dark agenda. The serpent had lost this battle, but the war for the world's future was far from over. For Gwyn, the fall of New Lundo represented another failure of his Age of Fire. He had trusted humans with a fragment of his power, believing they could help maintain order. Instead, they had fallen to the very darkness he had worked so hard to suppress. The city he had blessed became a monument to the dangers of ambition and the seductive nature of the abyss. New Lundo's ruins would remain underwater for years, a silent testament to what happens when humans reach too far into the darkness. The ghosts would continue their eternal patrol. The 4 kings would wait in the depths, bound to the abyss they had embraced. And somewhere in the flooded streets, the dark wraiths and their serpent master plotted for the day when they might finally bring about the Age of Dark they so desperately desired. The Age of Fire was showing more cracks. First, the Chaos Flame. Now the fall of New Lundo. Gwyn's perfect world was crumbling piece by piece, and even his direct intervention could not stop the decay. The first flame continued to fade, and with each passing year, the darkness grew stronger. Sometimes legends are built on tragedies that nobody remembers correctly. Beyond the borders of Lordran, in a distant land called Ulasil, life continued peacefully while Gwyn's kingdom dealt with chaos demons and flooded cities. Ulasil was an ancient kingdom known for its golden sorceries, magical arts that drew on light and life rather than darkness. A gentle king ruled alongside his daughter, Princess Dusk, and their people lived in harmony with the forests and magic that surrounded them. They had no reason to fear the conflicts troubling other lands. They believed themselves safe. But safety is an illusion when primordial serpents take interest in your kingdom. Someone came to Ulasil with whispers and suggestions. The evidence suggests it was Katie, the same serpent who had corrupted the 4 kings of New Lundo. He had his own agenda, one that required unleashing forces best left buried. The people of Ulasil did not know they were being manipulated. They thought they were being guided towards something important, something that would benefit their kingdom. Kath deceived them into excavating a grave that should have remained undisturbed forever. Deep beneath Ulasil lay the resting place of Manus, the primeval man. This being was either the furtive pygmy himself or his direct descendant, one who carried the full weight of the Dark Soul's power. Manus had been sleeping in his grave for ages beyond counting, his presence forgotten by the world above. The people of Ulasil dug down through layers of earth and stone until they broke through into his tomb. Waking Manus was the worst mistake they could have made. The disturbance drove him into immediate madness. Whatever dreams or peace he had known in his long sleep shattered the moment he was exposed to the world again. Rage consumed him. Pain overwhelmed his thoughts. He became something terrible in his fury, transforming into what would be known as the Father of the Abyss. The power of the Dark Soul within him erupted outward in a torrent of pure darkness. The Abyss engulfed Ulasil like a flood of shadow. This was not the controlled darkness that lived within human hearts. This was primordial darkness given physical form. The void that existed before the first flame brought light. It poured through the streets of Ulasil, corrupting everything it touched. Buildings twisted into nightmare versions of themselves. Trees became gnarled horrors, and the people suffered worst of all. The citizens of Ulasil mutated into crazed creatures of the abyss. Their bodies warped into monstrous shapes. Their minds broke under the weight of the darkness consuming them. They became violent and mindless, attacking anything that still resembled what they used to be. The peaceful kingdom descended into complete chaos as the abyss spread through every corner of the land. Princess Dusk was captured by Manus's power. The Father of the Abyss imprisoned her within a crystal golem, trapping her in a magical prison where she could do nothing but watch her kingdom destroy itself. She remained conscious but helpless, unable to save her people or herself. Word of the catastrophe reached Anor Londo. Reports spoke of an entire kingdom consumed by darkness, of the abyss spreading unchecked through lands that bordered Lordran itself. If nothing was done, the corruption would eventually reach Gwyn's territory. Another threat to the Age of Fire needed to be stopped, and Gwyn had just the knight for the task. Knight Artorius the Abyss Walker was one of the 4 knights of Gwyn, famous for his fearlessness when facing the dark. Where other warriors hesitated before the abyss, Artorius walked into it without doubt. He was an unparalleled swordsman who had proven himself countless times in service to Gwyn. His loyalty was absolute. His courage was legendary. He seemed like the perfect choice to handle the crisis in Ulasil. Artorius prepared for his mission carefully. He carried his greatsword and wore his distinctive armor. He brought his cleansing great shield, designed specifically to protect against dark corruption. Most importantly, he wore a divine ring that allowed him to resist the abyss itself, walking through darkness that would consume ordinary warriors. He would not face this challenge alone either. His loyal companion Sif, a great grey wolf who had fought beside him for years, travelled with him to Ulasil. They arrived to find the kingdom already devastated. The abyss had transformed the once beautiful land into something nightmarish. Corrupted creatures roamed through twisted forests. The royal wood that surrounded Ulasil had become a labyrinth of shadow and horror. Artorius fought his way through the corrupted township, seeking Princess Dusk and the source of the darkness. He found Manus at the heart of the abyss. The Father of the Abyss was a being of pure rage and sorrow, a twisted mass of darkness wielding power that dwarfed anything Artorius had faced before. The knight engaged Manus in battle, determined to stop the corruption from spreading further. His skill with the sword was legendary. His resistance to the abyss was unprecedented. But even legendary skill and unprecedented resistance have limits when facing the Father of the Abyss himself. Artorius could not win. The darkness was too strong, too limitless, too overwhelming. Manus broke through every defense and pressed his advantage relentlessly. In the final moments of the fight, as the abyss closed in on both Artorias and Sif, the knight made a choice. He used his cleansing great shield to protect his wolf companion, wrapping Sif in a protective barrier that would keep the darkness at bay. This selfless act saved Sif, but left Artorias exposed and vulnerable. The abyss overtook him completely. His arm was broken, his body was corrupted, his mind was consumed by the darkness he had tried so hard to resist. Artorias, the Abyss Walker, one of Gwyn's greatest knights, was defeated and transformed into something he would have hated. He became corrupted by the very force he had sworn to fight against, wandering the ruins of Ulasil as a mad creature driven by the abyss within him. Ulasil appeared to be completely lost. The kingdom was destroyed, its people were monsters, its princess was imprisoned, and the knight sent to save it had fallen to the darkness. History recorded Artorias as being lost to the abyss, another victim of the primordial darkness that threatened the Age of Fire. The story seemed to end there, a tragedy with no redemption. But time is not as straightforward as it appears, especially when the abyss is involved. Years later, during the events that would define the chosen undead's journey, something strange happened. Manus's power reached through time itself, creating a portal that pulled an undead warrior backward from the future into the moment of Ulasil's downfall. This stranger from another era arrived in the past with no clear understanding of what was happening or why. They only knew they had been transported to a kingdom in crisis, and they had the power to do something about it. This future warrior found Artorias wandering the township, completely corrupted by the abyss. The knight who had once been fearless now attacked mindlessly, driven by darkness and pain. The stranger fought Artorias in combat, a battle between someone trying to save the past and someone already lost to it. Eventually, the corrupted knight fell. The stranger put Artorias to rest, ending his suffering and freeing him from the abyss that had consumed him. But the mission was not complete. The stranger continued what Artorias had started. They traversed the abyss-infected royal wood, fighting through corrupted creatures and twisted landscape until they reached Manus himself. The battle with the father of the abyss was grueling and desperate, but the warrior from the future succeeded where Artorias had failed. They defeated Manus, destroying the source of the abyssal corruption. With Manus defeated, the stranger rescued Princess Dusk from her crystal prison. The abyss in Ulasil dissipated, at least for the moment. The immediate threat was ended, but the damage had already been done. Ulasil was left in ruins, reduced to ashes and shadow. The kingdom that had once prospered through golden sorceries was destroyed beyond recovery. Its people were dead or transformed beyond recognition. Its legacy would be nothing but cautionary tales about disturbing what should stay buried. When Princess Dusk was freed, she saw her rescuer and made an understandable mistake. She believed she was looking at Artorias himself. The stranger did not correct her. They returned to their own time, leaving the past to remember things the way it wanted to. History recorded that Artorias the Abyss Walker had stopped the spread of the abyss in Ulasil, sacrificing himself to save the kingdom. The true hero who had come from the future to finish his mission remained unknown and uncelebrated. Artorias became a legend. His name was honored across Lordran as the knight who walked into the abyss and stopped its spread. People told stories about his courage and sacrifice. His grave was built in Darkroot, the forest that had once been part of Ulasil's territory. His loyal wolf Sif remained there, guarding the resting place of the master who had saved him. The broken great shield and the ring that had allowed Artorias to walk through darkness were left as relics, remnants of a hero who had given everything to protect the world from shadow. The truth was more complicated and more tragic than the legends suggested. Artorias had failed his mission and been corrupted by the darkness. Someone else had saved Ulasil, or what little could be saved of it. But legends rarely care about complicated truths. They prefer simple stories about noble sacrifice and heroic victory. The fall of Ulasil demonstrated several things that would become increasingly important as the Age of Fire continued its decline. It showed that Karda was actively working to bring about an Age of Dark, manipulating kingdoms and unleashing forces he could not fully control. It proved that even the greatest knights could fall to the abyss if they faced enough of it. And it revealed that the Dark Soul's power, when concentrated in beings like Manus, was terrifying enough to consume entire civilizations. Manus's influence would linger even after his defeat. Fragments of his power remained, giving rise to dark sorceries and other manifestations of the abyss that would trouble the world for ages. The primeval man's rage had been ended, but the darkness he unleashed would never fully disappear. For Gwyn and the Age of Fire, Ulasil was another warning sign that things were falling apart. The kingdom had been beyond his direct control, but its destruction showed how vulnerable the world was to the forces he had tried so hard to suppress. The Dark Soul, the Abyss, the natural progression toward an Age of Dark. All of these threats were growing stronger as the first flame continued to fade, and there seemed to be no way to stop the inevitable decline of everything Gwyn had built. Everything Gwyn built was dying, and he knew it. The first flame that had sparked disparity into existence, that had given him his Lord's soul, that had fueled the entire Age of Fire, was fading. This was not sudden. The decline had been happening for centuries, visible in the increasing threats to his kingdom. The Chaos Flame disaster, the fall of New Lundo, the destruction of Ulasil. Each catastrophe was a symptom of the same underlying problem. The fire that powered everything was running out of fuel, and when it finally died, the Age of Fire would end with it. Gwyn understood what would happen next. If the first flame extinguished completely, the natural order would shift. The Age of Dark would begin, an era where the power of the Dark Soul would rise to prominence. Humanity, with their fragments of that primordial darkness, would become the dominant force in the world. A Dark Lord might emerge to lead them into this new age. The gods would lose their supremacy. The sunlight Gwyn had championed would give way to shadow. This terrified him more than anything he had faced before. The dragons had been enemies he could fight with lightning and armies. The demons had been creatures he could contain with force. But the fading of the flame was not an enemy. It was simply the natural end of a cycle that had begun the moment the first flame ignited. Fighting it seemed impossible. Yet Gwyn refused to accept that his age should end. He conceived a plan that would require everything he had left to give. If the first flame needed fuel to continue burning, he would provide it himself. He would take his own Lord's soul, the most powerful soul claimed from the flame's depths, and offer it as kindling. He would link the fire, becoming one with the flame to rekindle it from within. This act would cost him his life, his identity, everything that made him who he was, but it would preserve the Age of Fire for at least a while longer. Before departing on this final journey, Gwyn made arrangements to secure whatever legacy he could. He had already given fragments of his Lord's soul to allies like Seath and the Four Kings. Now he distributed more pieces to his family. Guinevere received a portion of his power. His firstborn son was given the power of sunlight itself, the lightning that Gwyn had wielded against the dragons. This effectively made the firstborn the new god of war in title, named as heir to rule Anor Londo in Gwyn's absence. Gwyn gave his remaining children and his loyal serpent Frampt specific instructions. They were to shepherd the humans, guiding them toward a purpose that would serve the Age of Fire. The plan Gwyn set in motion was elegant in its cruelty. He arranged for prophecies to spread, legends about a chosen undead who would one day rise and inherit the fate of the flame. Future humans would be guided toward the same sacrifice Gwyn was about to make. When the flame faded again, another soul would feed it, then another. The Age of Fire could continue indefinitely through an endless cycle of sacrifice. With his preparations complete, Gwyn gathered his knights for the final march. The Black Knights who had survived the Chaos battles, their armor forever charred by infernal fires, assembled to escort their lord. They had followed him against demons. They would follow him to the flame itself. These were his most loyal soldiers, warriors who understood that this journey would have no return. Gwyn dressed in his royal robes and placed his great crown upon his head one last time. He carried his greatsword, the weapon that had struck down dragons and commanded armies. He looked every part the Lord of Sunlight he had been since the war that birthed his kingdom. But beneath the regalia was a being approaching the end of his existence, walking toward a fate he had chosen over accepting the natural order of the world. The kiln of the first flame lay deep beneath the earth, a sacred place constructed specifically to house and protect the flame that had started everything. Gwyn led his knights through passages that descended into darkness, toward the faint glow that marked where the flame still clung to existence. When they arrived, what they found must have been heartbreaking. The first flame was barely embers. The fire that had once burned bright enough to end the Age of Ancients, that had provided Lord souls powerful enough to defeat immortal dragons, was now little more than a dying flicker. The Age of Fire had nearly consumed itself entirely. Another few years, perhaps decades, and it would have been gone forever. Gwyn approached the embers without hesitation. He had made his choice long before arriving here. Whether this was a noble sacrifice to preserve the world he loved, or a selfish act to prevent humanity from claiming their natural inheritance remains a matter of interpretation. Perhaps it was both. Gwyn threw himself into the fading flames. His lord's soul ignited instantly. The power that had defined him for countless centuries became fuel for the fire he had served. The first flame roared back to life with tremendous force, fed by the most powerful soul it had ever consumed. Light exploded outward, filling the kiln with brilliance that had not been seen since the flame's earliest days. The Age of Fire would continue, but the cost was absolute. The blast that rekindled the flame scorched everything within the kiln. Stone melted. The ground turned to ash. The Black Knights who had escorted Gwyn were incinerated instantly, reduced to cinders by the explosion of flame they had walked into willingly. Their spirits did not find rest. Instead, they became wandering phantoms, restless Black Knights who would roam Lordran aimlessly for eternity, searching for a lord who no longer existed in any meaningful way. Gwyn himself was consumed down to his very essence. His body burned away, his memories scattered, his identity dissolved into the flame he was feeding. What remained was not the Lord of Sunlight, who had built Anor Londo and defeated the dragons. What remained was a hollowed shell, an ashen husk fused to the core of the first flame. Gwyn became the first Lord of Cinder, bound to the fire forever as both its fuel and its guardian. The being that existed after the linking was not truly Gwyn anymore. It was a mindless remnant, tethered to the flame without purpose beyond feeding it. If anyone approached the kiln, This hollow Lord of Cinder would attack on instinct, protecting the flame without understanding why. The god who had once ruled from the greatest city in existence was reduced to an undead guardian, haunting a scorched pit beneath the world. The kiln of the first flame was sealed after Gwyn's sacrifice. The path to the fire was closed, ensuring that no one could easily approach what remained of the Lord of Sunlight. The world above continued in the Age of Fire, unaware of the precise nature of what Gwyn had done. Anolondo still stood. The other lords still held their domains. Life continued as if the crisis had been averted rather than simply delayed. But Darkstalker Carther would later speak of this event with contempt. The Serpent of the Abyss called Gwyn's linking of the fire the first sin. In Carther's view, this was an unnatural act that violated the proper order of the world. The Age of Dark should have arrived when the flame died. Humanity should have inherited the world that their dark soul fragments entitled them to. Instead, Gwyn stole that future from them. He extended an age that was supposed to end and cursed humanity with consequences they did not yet understand. The linking of the fire meant the cycle would never truly end. The flame would always need more fuel. More souls would have to be sacrificed to keep it burning. And because the dark sign was tied to the flame, humanity would suffer in ways that only became clear as time passed. The undead curse that would eventually plague the world was a direct result of Gwyn's choice to perpetuate an age that should have concluded naturally. For now, though, the immediate crisis was resolved. The first flame burned brightly once more. The Age of Fire continued. Gwyn's children and followers maintained the illusion that the gods still held power, even with their lord reduced to cinders in a sealed kiln. Frampt began spreading the prophecy of the chosen undead, preparing for the day when the flame would fade again and require a new sacrifice. The world did not know that its salvation was temporary. The flame would dim again eventually. The cycle Gwyn had created would demand another soul, then another, stretching forward through generations of suffering. The Lord of Sunlight had preserved his age, but he had also doomed the world to repeat this tragedy forever. In the kiln, the hollow remains of Gwyn sat before the fire he had fed with everything he was. The Lord of Cinder waited in darkness and flame, no longer remembering the kingdom he had built or the family he had left behind. He was simply a guardian now, a weapon that would activate against anyone who approached the flame. The greatest of the gods had become the loneliest creature in existence, trapped in an eternal vigil he could no longer comprehend. The Age of Fire had been purchased with his soul. Whether that price was worth paying would depend entirely on who eventually arrived to claim the flame for themselves. The throne was empty, and everyone knew what that meant. Gwyn's sacrifice had saved the Age of Fire, but it had also left a void at the heart of his kingdom that could never truly be filled. The Lord of Sunlight was gone, reduced to cinders in the kiln far below. Anolondo still stood in all its white granite splendor, but the power that had made it the capital of the gods was fading along with the memory of its founder. The centuries after Gwyn's departure were marked by slow decline. The first flame burned brighter thanks to his sacrifice, but it would not stay that way forever. As time passed, the flame began to waver again, and with it, the stability of everything the gods had built. The divine beings who had populated Anolondo started to question whether staying was worth the risk of whatever came next. Gwyn's firstborn son initially stepped into the role his father had prepared for him. He had received the power of sunlight before Gwyn departed. He had been named heir to rule Anolondo. He led the remaining knights and tried to maintain the order his father had established. For a time, it seemed like the succession would work as Gwyn had intended. Then the firstborn did something that shattered everything. The details remain shrouded in mystery and shame. What is known is that the firstborn betrayed his father's law by allying with the dragons, the very creatures that Gwyn had fought and nearly exterminated. The enemies whose defeat had defined the beginning of the Age of Fire somehow earned the sympathy of his own son. Perhaps the firstborn saw something in the ancient dragons that others had missed. Perhaps he questioned whether the war had been justified. Whatever his reasons, his actions were considered unforgivable by those who remained loyal to Gwyn's memory. The punishment was absolute. The firstborn was stripped of his deific status, cast down from the position his father had given him. His name was struck from every record in Anor Londo. Statues depicting him were destroyed or defaced. References to his existence were purged from historical texts. The son who had fought alongside Gwyn against the dragons, who had thrown lightning spears that brought down the everlasting, was erased from history as thoroughly as the gods had once erased humanity's contributions to the war. He was exiled from Anor Londo and forbidden from returning. Over time, as his name vanished from memory, he became known only by what he lacked. The nameless king, people would call him in legends that barely remembered he existed. A god without identity, wandering somewhere beyond the borders of the kingdom that had been his birthright. The loss of the firstborn created a crisis of succession that Anor Londo could not easily solve. Gwyn's intended heir was gone. The line of sunlight had been broken by the very person meant to continue it. Princess Guinevere made her own choice soon after. She had been Gwyn's beloved daughter, the radiant goddess of fertility and bounty. Her presence in Anor Londo had symbolized the prosperity of the Age of Fire. But with her father consumed by flame and her brother exiled in disgrace, Guinevere saw no reason to remain in a city that was becoming a monument to loss. She departed Anor Londo, along with many other remaining deities. The lore suggests she traveled to a distant land and married flame god Flann, seeking a life away from the fading glory of her father's kingdom. Her exodus was not a single event, but part of a larger abandonment. Gods and divine beings who had once filled Anor Londo's halls decided that staying served no purpose. They scattered to other realms, other lands, anywhere that was not this slowly darkening capital. When the departures finally stopped, Anor Londo was nearly empty. The streets that had once bustled with divine activity fell silent. The grand halls echoed with nothing but the footsteps of sentinel constructs and a handful of loyal guardians who refused to leave. The city of the gods had become a city of ghosts, populated by memories rather than people. Only one deity of Gwyn's bloodline remained, Prince Gwyndolin, the youngest child, the one who had been raised as a daughter because of his connection to moon magic rather than sunlight. He was frail compared to his siblings, more comfortable in darkness than in the brilliant light his father had championed. He had never been meant to rule anything, yet here he was, the last god standing in a kingdom built for beings far greater than himself. Gwyndolin understood something crucial about the situation. If the followers of the gods learned that Anor Londo had been abandoned, if they discovered that the pantheon had scattered and only a single weak deity remained, their faith would shatter. The systems Gwyn had built, the religion and economy centered on divine power, would collapse. The prophecy of the chosen undead that was supposed to perpetuate the Age of Fire would lose its meaning. Everything his father had sacrificed himself to preserve would unravel. So Gwyndolin did the only thing he could. He created an illusion. Using his mastery of moon magic and deception, Gwyndolin crafted a brilliant image of Guinevere that would greet anyone who reached the royal quarters. This false goddess appeared radiant and welcoming, exactly as the real Guinevere had been in her prime. She would speak words of encouragement to pilgrims and undead who made the journey to Anor Londo. She would bestow the Lord Vessel upon those deemed worthy. She would make it seem like the gods were still present and watching over their followers. Gwyndolin went further. He bathed the entire city in artificial sunlight, maintaining the appearance of eternal day, even though Anor Londo had actually fallen into perpetual dusk. Any visitor would see the gleaming white city they expected, lit by what seemed like divine radiance. They would never know that the true Anor Londo was dark and cold, illuminated only by moonlight when the illusions were stripped away. The deception was masterful and complete. Gwyndolin himself remained hidden, never revealing his presence to outsiders. He governed through his illusion of Guinevere, guiding events from the shadows while maintaining the facade of a functioning divine capital. The city became a stage set, beautiful and convincing from the outside, but hollow at its core. To protect what remained, Gwyndolin formed the Blade of the Dark Moon Covenant in secret. These shadowy knights served as instruments of the gods' vengeance, hunting anyone who sinned against divine authority. Those who stole power from the gods or desecrated their names became targets for the Dark Moon Blades. They also served as protectors of Anor Londo itself, ensuring that anyone unworthy of entering would be dealt with before they could discover the truth. Under Gwyndolin's watch, Anor Londo transformed into something between a shrine and a trap. It remained open for the prophesied chosen undead to visit, maintaining its role in the cycle Gwyn had established. Powerful guardians still protected the important areas. The Lord Vessel waited in the chamber where the illusory Guinevere sat. Everything was arranged to test and guide whoever arrived seeking to inherit the flame. But the grandeur was a lie. The glory was gone. The gods who had built this place and filled it with divine purpose had abandoned it long ago. Anyone who saw through the illusion, who disturbed the false Guinevere and broke the spell, would witness Anor Londo as it truly was. The artificial sunlight would vanish, replaced by the cold glow of moonlight. The welcoming warmth would give way to empty darkness. The city of the gods would stand revealed as a mausoleum, a monument to an age that was already over in every way that mattered. Gwyndolin maintained his vigil regardless. He was the last faithful guardian of a legacy that everyone else had abandoned. He preserved the illusion because the alternative was admitting that the Age of Fire had already failed, that his father's sacrifice had purchased only a temporary reprieve. As long as the facade held, as long as undead continued arriving to play their role in the cycle, there was still hope that the flame could be linked again. Anor Londo, in its twilight state, waited for the chosen undead who would eventually arrive. The city held crucial artifacts and powerful guardians. It contained the Lord Vessel, needed to access the domains of the remaining Lord Soul Holders. It offered the guidance of a goddess who did not actually exist. And hidden in the depths, Gwyndolin watched everything. The last son of Gwyn, keeping alive a dream that had died when his father walked into the flame. The city of sunlight had become a city of moonlight, pretending to be something it was not. The truth lay buried beneath layers of magical deception, waiting for someone perceptive enough or destructive enough to tear the illusions away and see what the Age of Fire had really become. The dark sign that Gwyn had burned into humanity finally showed its true nature. For generations after Gwyn's sacrifice, the mark he had placed on human souls remained dormant. Humans lived and passed away normally, unaware of the ring of fire sealed within them. The dark sign had been designed to shackle the dark soul, to keep humanity weak and bound to the flame. But as the first flame began to waver again, as the fuel Gwyn had provided started running low, the dark sign activated in ways no one had anticipated. humans started coming back from the grave. The first cases were isolated. Someone would pass away from illness or injury, and then they would simply wake up again. The dark sign would glow on their body, a circular mark of fire that had not been visible before. These people were no longer truly alive, but they were not truly gone either. They existed in a state between unable to find permanent rest no matter how many times their bodies failed them. This was the undead curse, and it spread across the world as the first flame continued to weaken. The connection was direct. Gwyn had tied the dark sign to the flame itself when he branded humanity. As long as the fire burned bright, the curse stayed dormant. But when the fire faded, the dark sign began forcing humans into an endless cycle of resurrection. Every person who bore the mark would return after their body gave out, pulled back into existence by the very brand meant to control them. At first, this might have seemed like a gift, immortality of a sort, the ability to survive anything because the dark sign would not let you stay gone. But the truth was far more horrible. Each resurrection came at a cost. Every time an undead returned from the void, they lost something. Memories would fade, emotions would dull. The sense of who they were would erode piece by piece. An undead might come back dozens of times, hundreds of times, and with each return, they would be less of the person they had been. The curse was not just about living forever. It was about slowly losing yourself until nothing remained but hunger and instinct. The final stage was called going hollow. An undead who had lost everything, every memory, every purpose, every trace of identity, would become a hollow. These creatures were mindless shells that looked vaguely human, but acted like predators. They attacked anything living, driven by an obsession with consuming souls that they could not understand or control. A hollow was what every undead would eventually become if they could not find a way to preserve their sense of self. As the curse spread, the living world reacted with terror. Normal humans saw the undead as abominations. These were people who should have stayed in their graves, walking around with glowing marks on their flesh, unable to be permanently stopped. Worse, everyone knew that undead eventually went hollow, becoming violent monsters that threatened anyone nearby. The curse felt like a plague, spreading through populations and turning ordinary people into potential dangers. Kingdoms across the world implemented harsh measures. In Astora, Thorolund, Karim, and other civilized lands, authorities began rounding up anyone who bore the dark sign. These undead were branded as criminals or treated like the infected. It did not matter who they had been before the curse took hold. A noble could become undead just as easily as a peasant, and both would face the same fate once the mark appeared on their body. The solution most kingdoms adopted was exile. Undead were gathered and sent away from populated areas, transported to remote locations where they could not threaten the living. The most common destination was the north, a frozen and desolate region far from any civilized land. The belief was that undead could be locked away there forever, contained until the end of the world if necessary. No one expected them to be cured. The goal was simply isolation. Religious institutions supported this persecution. The Way of White, the church based in Thorolund, tasked holy knights with missions involving the undead. Some of these missions were about putting undead to rest, ending their suffering through combat. Others were about ensuring the undead stayed contained and did not spread their curse further. Fear and faith combined to justify treating the cursed as something less than human. One prison became infamous above all others. The Northern Undead Asylum was a fortress built specifically to hold undead prisoners in the distant north. Countless cursed humans were thrown into its cells and left there indefinitely. There was no trial. There was no sentence with an end date. Once you entered the asylum, you were expected to stay until you finally went hollow or the world itself ended. The asylum was designed as a death sentence that never quite completed itself. Undead prisoners would languish in their cells, starving or injuring themselves, only to resurrect and face the same misery again. Each return stripped away more of who they were. The isolation and despair accelerated the process of going hollow. Prisoners who had arrived with their minds intact would gradually lose everything, becoming the mindless creatures everyone feared. Eventually, the guards and wardens abandoned the asylum. Perhaps they grew tired of watching over prisoners who could never truly be contained. Perhaps they succumbed to the curse themselves and went hollow. Whatever the reason, the Northern Undead Asylum became a place without supervision, overrun by its undead inmates and patrolled by monstrous custodians like the asylum demon. The prison continued to exist, but it had transformed from a place of containment into a forgotten pit where the cursed were thrown and ignored. Amid all this suffering, a prophecy began to spread. The legend spoke of a chosen undead who would one day escape the asylum and make a pilgrimage to Lordran, the land of the ancient lords. This chosen undead would ring two bells of awakening, one high above and one deep below. When the bells were rung, the fate of the undead would be revealed. The prophecy promised meaning and purpose to those who had been abandoned by the world. It offered hope that the curse might be broken, or that some greater destiny awaited those strong enough to pursue it. The origins of this prophecy were likely not accidental. King Seeker Frampt and the followers of Gwyn had been instructed to shepherd humanity toward continuing the cycle. A legend promising salvation to the undead served that purpose perfectly. It encouraged cursed humans to seek out Lordran, to ring the bells, to eventually discover the kiln where Gwyn's remains waited. The prophecy was almost certainly part of Gwyn's original design, a manipulation disguised as hope. But to the undead clinging to sanity in a world that hated them, the prophecy felt real. Some embraced it as a holy mission. Oscar of Astora, a knight from a noble family, deliberately accepted becoming undead so he could fulfill what he believed was a sacred duty. Others like him saw the curse not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to achieve something meaningful before they lost themselves entirely. Not every undead succumbed to the hollow state immediately. Strong-willed individuals could retain their sanity for extended periods, sometimes years. These people often became adventurers or pilgrims, setting out on journeys while they still had the capacity to choose their path. They sought cures, miracles, anything that might save them from the fate awaiting all who bore the dark sign. Many of them pursued the prophecy, hoping that reaching Lordran and ringing the bells would provide answers. What they did not know was that the prophecy was designed to use them. The chosen undead was not meant to break the curse or find salvation. The chosen undead was meant to become fuel for the first flame, just as Gwyn had been. The cycle demanded sacrifice, and the prophecy ensured a steady supply of willing victims who believed they were pursuing something greater. The world had reached a critical point. The first flame was fading again. The undead curse was spreading faster than ever. Kingdoms were collapsing under the weight of persecution and fear. And somewhere in the Northern Undead Asylum, among countless hollows and forgotten prisoners, an undead sat in a cell waiting for something to change. The stage was set for the events of Dark Souls. A prophecy waited to be fulfilled. A flame waited to be fed. And an entire world waited to learn whether the Age of Fire would continue for another cycle or finally give way to the Age of Dark that had been delayed for so long. Everything depended on what the chosen undead would do when they finally escaped their prison and began the journey to Lordran. in a forgotten cell at the edge of the world, someone was about to wake up. The Northern Undead Asylum held countless prisoners who had long since lost any hope of escape. Most had gone hollow, their minds erased by endless cycles of despair and resurrection. But in one cold cell, a nameless undead sat waiting for something they could not define. This person had been branded with the dark sign like all the others. They had been thrown into confinement like all the others. They had begun the slow slide toward becoming hollow like all the others. Yet something kept them clinging to awareness, some stubborn refusal to let go of who they were. This undead would become the chosen undead of prophecy, but they did not know that yet. They only knew the cold stone walls of their cell and the meaningless eternity stretching ahead of them. Then fate intervened in the form of a corpse falling through the ceiling. Oscar of Astora was a knight who had deliberately accepted the undead curse. He came from a noble family and had heard the prophecy about a chosen undead who would escape the asylum and journey to Lordran. Oscar believed in this legend with absolute conviction. He had ventured into the Northern Undead Asylum specifically to find the one the prophecy described, the undead who would ring the bells of awakening and discover the fate of all who bore the dark sign. The asylum had not been kind to Oscar. The demons and hollows that roamed its halls had wounded him severely. By the time he reached the roof of the cell block, he was barely holding on to life. But he had found what he was looking for. Looking down through the broken ceiling, he saw an undead who still retained their sanity, someone who might be capable of fulfilling the prophecy he had devoted himself to. Oscar dropped a corpse carrying a key into the cell below. This simple act, performed by a man who had almost nothing left to give, changed everything. The dungeon's cell key landed within reach of the nameless undead, offering them something that had seemed impossible moments before: a way out. The chosen undead used the key to open their cell door and step into the asylum proper. What they found was a nightmare-given architecture. The halls were dark and filled with undead who had gone completely hollow, shambling creatures who attacked anything that moved. The chosen undead was unarmed at first, forced to navigate carefully through the dangers until they found a basic shield and weapon to defend themselves. A towering demon patrolled the main hall of the asylum. This was the asylum demon, a massive creature with a hammer that could crush stone. The chosen undead encountered this monster before they were ready to face it. Wisdom demanded retreat, and the undead fled through a side door rather than confront something so clearly beyond their current ability to handle. The path of escape led to a small chapel where Oscar of Astora had taken shelter. The knight was in terrible condition. The demons had wounded him beyond any hope of recovery, and he was using his last moments of clarity to wait for the undead he had helped free. When the chosen undead arrived, Oscar recognized them and understood that his mission was complete. With fading breath, Oscar shared the prophecy that had driven him to this forgotten place. He spoke of a pilgrimage to Lordran, the land of ancient lords. He described bells that needed to be rung, one above and one below. He promised that when those bells sounded, the fate of the undead would finally be revealed. These words carried the weight of everything Oscar had sacrificed to deliver them. Oscar gave the chosen undead 2 gifts that would prove essential for the journey ahead. The first was an Estus flask, a mystical container filled with sacred fire that could heal undead wounds. This treasure was invaluable, allowing the bearer to recover from injuries that would have ended anyone else. The second gift was another key, one that would help the chosen undead navigate further through the asylum and reach the exit. Having passed on everything he could, Oscar's strength finally gave out. The knight who had believed so strongly in the prophecy would not live to see it fulfilled. Some accounts suggest that in his final moments, Oscar asked the chosen undead to end his suffering rather than let him slowly become hollow. Whether that mercy was granted remains a private matter between the two undead who shared that chapel. The chosen undead continued alone, now armed and carrying the weight of Oscar's faith. The path forward led back toward the asylum demon that had forced them to flee before. But this time would be different. This time, the chosen undead was prepared to fight. The battle unfolded in a courtyard as the asylum demon swung its massive hammer. The chosen undead used every advantage available. The architecture of the asylum allowed for a tactical approach, dropping from above to strike the demon before it could fully respond. Whatever weapons had been scavenged from the dark halls found their purpose here, biting into demon flesh with each successful strike. The asylum demon fell. This creature that had terrorized the prison, that had wounded Oscar beyond recovery, collapsed under the assault of an undead who refused to accept confinement. Upon the demon's defeat, the chosen undead claimed the Big Pilgrim's key from its remains. This key opened the massive front gate of the asylum, the barrier that separated prisoners from the outside world. Stepping through that iron gate felt like emerging from a grave. The chosen undead stood on the outer cliffside of the asylum, breathing air that was not recycled through prison corridors. The cold of the north surrounded them, but it was the cold of freedom. The first real victory of their journey was complete. A cliffside perch with a strange bird's nest marked the end of the asylum grounds. The chosen undead approached it, perhaps wondering what purpose such a nest served in this desolate place. The answer came from the sky. A giant crow descended with wings that blocked out the pale northern sun. This enormous black bird was unlike any natural creature, a being of mysterious origin that might have been a messenger of the gods or an agent of the primordial serpent Framd. Whatever its true nature, its purpose was clear. It had come to carry the chosen undead away from the asylum and toward the destiny that awaited. The crow grasped the chosen undead in its talons and lifted them into the air. The flight that followed was both beautiful and foreboding. Below, the cold wastelands of the north gave way to open sea. The desolate regions where undead were sent to be forgotten fell away behind them. Ahead lay Lordran, the kingdom where the gods had once ruled, where the first flame still burned in its sealed kiln, where the prophecy Oscar had shared would either be fulfilled or proven false. The journey across the sea ended at Firelink Shrine. This ruined temple sat at the base of the region, where Anor Londo towered above all other structures. The crow deposited the chosen undead here and departed without explanation, leaving them to face whatever came next on their own. Firelink Shrine was a place of convergence. Paths led from here to the various corners of Lordran. A bonfire burned at its center, offering rest and recovery to undead who knew how to use it. Other travelers passed through this place, some helpful and some not, all of them pursuing their own purposes in a world that was slowly falling apart. The chosen undead stood at Firelink Shrine with the prophecy echoing in their mind. Ring the bells of awakening. Discover the fate of the undead. These instructions were all they had. The land around them was filled with the ruins of Gwyn's age and the dangers that had accumulated since his departure. Every step forward would be a battle. Every choice would carry weight. But the prison cell was behind them now. The asylum demon was defeated. Oscar's sacrifice had meaning, because the chosen undead had survived to carry his faith forward. Whatever trials waited in Lordran, whatever horrors lurked in the shadows of the gods' abandoned kingdom, the chosen undead would face them. The pilgrimage had begun. Firelink Shrine was a place of rest in a world that offered very little of it. The ancient temple sat at the intersection of many paths through Lordran, a crumbling hub where weary travelers could gather their strength before pressing onward. A bonfire burned at its center, maintained by forces the chosen undead did not yet understand. This sacred flame offered healing and respite to anyone who knew how to use it. For an undead carrying Oscar's prophecy in their mind, it was the first real sanctuary they had known since escaping the asylum. The chosen undead was not the only person at Firelink Shrine. A man sat near the bonfire, armored but clearly not planning to go anywhere. This was the crestfallen warrior, and his cynical attitude matched his name perfectly. He had heard the prophecy about the bells of awakening. He knew exactly what the chosen undead had been told, and he did not believe any of it would matter. Still, the crestfallen warrior provided valuable information. He confirmed what Oscar had said and added crucial details. There were 2 bells of awakening that needed to be rung. One was located high above in the bell tower of the undead parish church. The other was far below, deep in the poisonous swamps of a place called Blighttown. Ringing both bells would supposedly awaken something momentous, though the crestfallen warrior doubted anyone would actually survive long enough to accomplish this task. His skepticism did not matter. The chosen undead had direction now. 2 bells, one above and one below. Whatever happened after that would reveal itself when the time came. Firelink Shrine also housed a firekeeper, though most visitors never saw her. Anastasia of Astora lived in a cell beneath the shrine, a mute woman whose sole purpose was maintaining the bonfire's flame. She could not speak, but her presence ensured that the sacred fire continued burning. The Estus flask the chosen undead carried drew its healing power from fires like this one. Anastasia's quiet dedication made recovery possible for every undead who passed through. The path forward led through places that had once been civilized. The undead burg was a walled town above Firelink that had fallen to the curse long ago. Its streets were now filled with hollow soldiers and thieves, mindless creatures that attacked anything living. The chosen undead fought through them, gaining experience and equipment with each encounter. Along the way, other undead appeared who were not yet hollow. Solaire of Astora stood on the ramparts of the burg, a knight wearing sun-emblazoned armor and carrying an inexplicably cheerful attitude. He spoke of seeking his own son, a personal quest that seemed oddly poetic for someone cursed with endless resurrection. Despite the strangeness of his mission, Solaire offered genuine help. He gave the chosen undead a white sign, soapstone, a magical item that allowed cooperation between undead travelers. With this stone, warriors could summon each other for aid in difficult battles. Solaire would become one of the most reliable allies the chosen undead encountered. His optimism in the face of the curse was unusual and perhaps a little mad, but his sword arm was steady and his willingness to help was genuine. Other characters appeared throughout the early journey. Knight Lautrec of Karim was found locked in a cell in the undead parish, apparently imprisoned by someone who knew he could not be trusted. If the chosen undead freed him, Lautrec offered thanks and made his way to Firelink Shrine. His true intentions remained hidden behind golden armor and polite words, but something about him suggested purposes beyond simple gratitude. Siegmeyer of Katarina appeared later, a jovial knight wearing armor shaped like an onion. He was first encountered sitting outside a massive fortress, pondering how to get inside. Siegmeyer seemed perpetually one step behind whatever challenge he faced, arriving at obstacles just after solutions became necessary. His story would weave through the chosen undead's journey as a light-hearted counterpoint to the darkness surrounding them. Sorcerers and pyromancers could be rescued from various dangers throughout Lordran. Griggs of Vinheim, trapped in the lower undead burg, could teach the chosen undead basic sorceries if freed. Laurentius of the Great Swamp, found imprisoned in the depths, shared the secrets of pyromancy with anyone who saved him. Each of these encounters provided new abilities and gear, making the chosen undead stronger with every step forward. These interactions proved something important. The chosen undead was not entirely alone in this journey. A small community of undead existed throughout Lordran, each person coping with the curse in their own way. Some sought knowledge, some sought purpose, some sought nothing more than a reason to keep moving forward. They formed a scattered fellowship of the damned, connected by their shared condition, if nothing else. The first bell of awakening waited at the top of the undead parish church. Reaching it required fighting through the burg and into the parish itself, a journey filled with hollows and other dangers. The final guardians of the bell tower were the bell gargoyles, two demonic creatures that protected the rooftop. These gargoyles breathed fire and attacked with halberds, working together to overwhelm anyone who challenged them. The battle against the gargoyles was one of the first true tests of the chosen undead's abilities. Some warriors faced them alone, relying on skill and patience. Others used Solare's summoning sign to bring the cheerful knight into the fight, evening the odds against two opponents. However, the battle was won. Victory allowed access to the belfry above. The chosen undead climbed to the top of the parish and rang the first bell of awakening. The sound echoed across Lordran, audible from distant corners of the kingdom. One bell down, one to go. The path to the second bell led in the opposite direction, down through the lower sections of the undead burg, into the depths where a filthy sewer system ran beneath the city. This underground passage was filled with slimes, undead butchers who had gone mad in their work, and worse things lurking in the dark. A massive creature called the Gaping Dragon guarded the way forward, a being so mutated by hunger that its entire torso had become a mouth. Beyond the depths lay Blighttown, and Blighttown was a nightmare. The poisonous swamp at the base of Lordran was exactly as terrible as its name suggested. Toxic bogs covered the ground, slowly draining the life from anyone who waded through them. Plague-infested creatures attacked from every direction. The air itself seemed hostile, thick with poison and despair. This was one of the most dangerous places in the entire kingdom, and the second bell waited at its heart. Chaos Witch Quelag made her domain in a structure above the swamp. She was one of the surviving daughters of Chaos, transformed by the disaster that had consumed her mother and sisters. Quelag's upper body remained somewhat human, but from the waist down she had become a monstrous spider. She guarded the second bell fiercely, fighting with a flaming sword and spewing lava at anyone who approached. The reason for her vigilance was her sister, the Fair Lady, who lay sick and dying nearby. Quelag protected the bell because protecting this location meant protecting what remained of her family. The chosen undead could not know this during their battle. They only knew that a powerful enemy stood between them and their goal. The fight against Quelag tested everything the chosen undead had learned. Her attacks were devastating, her movements unpredictable, but skill and determination won out. And eventually, the daughter of Chaos fell. The chosen undead climbed past her remains and rang the second bell of awakening. The sound joined with the memory of the first bell, and something changed in Lordran. Far above, near the cliffs beyond Firelink Shrine, a massive stone gate began to move. Sen's fortress was a testing ground built by the gods long ago, designed to challenge anyone seeking passage to Anor Londo. The fortress had been sealed for ages, but the ringing of both bells caused its entrance to open. The path to the city of the gods was now accessible to whoever could survive the trials within. The bells also awakened something else. At Firelink Shrine, in a well that had seemed empty before, a massive serpentine creature stirred from slumber. This was King Seeker Frampt, a primordial serpent who claimed to be a friend of the great Lord Gwyn. Frampt emerged to greet the chosen undead, ready to guide them on the next part of their journey. His long, beard-like whiskers and writhing body were unsettling, but he spoke with authority about the prophecy and what needed to happen next. However, the triumph of ringing both bells came with a cost that some would discover upon returning to Firelink. Lautrec of Karim had been waiting for this moment. While the chosen undead was away in Blighttown, the Golden Knight had finally acted on his hidden agenda. He had descended to Anastasia's cell beneath the shrine and taken her life, stealing her Firekeeper soul for purposes of his own. The chosen undead who had freed Lautrec returned to find Firelink Shrine changed. The bonfire was extinguished, its sacred flame gone with the Firekeeper who had maintained it. Anastasia's cell stood open, her body lifeless inside. Lautrec had vanished, leaving behind only a black eye orb that would allow the chosen undead to track him later. This betrayal stung deeply. The chosen undead had shown mercy to someone imprisoned, and that mercy had been repaid with treachery. Even fellow undead could not always be trusted. The curse brought out desperation in people, driving them to acts they might never have considered in life. Lautrec's motives remained unclear. Some suggested he wanted Anastasia's soul to revive another Firekeeper he worshipped. Others believed he simply acted out of selfishness, taking what he wanted without regard for others. Whatever his reasons, he had robbed Firelink of its bonfire and stolen something precious from the chosen undead's journey. The black eye orb would quiver when carried into Anor Londo, signaling an opportunity to confront Lautrec and avenge Anastasia. But that reckoning would have to wait. The main path was clear despite this setback. Sen's fortress had opened. Frampt was awake and offering guidance. The chosen undead had proven themselves by ringing both bells, fulfilling the first part of the prophecy Oscar had shared. Whatever awaited in the fortress and beyond, the journey would continue. The bells had awakened more than just gates and serpents. They had awakened the possibility that the curse might have meaning after all. Sen's fortress was designed to break anyone who entered it. The massive structure stood as the gateway to Anor Londo, sealed for ages until the ringing of both bells caused its entrance to open. Now the chosen undead approached its towering walls, knowing that whatever waited inside had been built specifically to test undead who sought passage to the city of the gods. This was not a place meant to be survived easily. It was a gauntlet designed to separate the worthy from the unworthy through the most brutal methods possible. The interior of Sen's fortress was a nightmare of traps and guardians. Swinging blade pendulums swept across narrow walkways, timed to catch anyone who moved without perfect precision. Pressure plates triggered volleys of arrows from hidden mechanisms in the walls. Boulder-rolling contraptions sent massive stones thundering down corridors to crush the unwary. Every step forward required careful observation and quick reflexes. Snake-headed serpent soldiers and mages patrolled the halls, adding living threats to the mechanical dangers. These creatures served as guards for a fortress that no longer had any apparent purpose beyond testing those who entered. The combination of traps and enemies made progress agonizingly slow, with each room presenting new ways to fail. Midway through the fortress, the chosen undead might discover a cage holding an unexpected prisoner. Big Hat Logan, a master sorcerer from Vinheim, had been captured and locked away by the fortress's guardians. Freeing him earned gratitude and the promise of powerful teachings later. Logan would become one of the most knowledgeable magic users the chosen undead could learn from, assuming they survived long enough to find him again. The peak of Sen's fortress offered a narrow rooftop arena where the final guardian waited. The Iron Golem was a giant animated suit of armor created by the gods to block passage to Anor Londo. This construct hurled challengers around with massive arms and refused to fall until enough damage had been dealt. The fight took place on a precarious platform where being thrown off the edge meant starting over. Some warriors faced the Iron Golem alone, learning its patterns and exploiting its weaknesses through careful combat. Others summoned help, calling upon allies like Iron Tarkus, whose phantom could provide crucial assistance. However the battle unfolded, it ended with the Iron Golem toppling from the fortress ramparts, its animated armor finally still. What happened next was unexpected. A trio of bat-winged demons descended from the sky, creatures that had once been captured and tamed during the war against chaos. They seized the chosen undead and lifted them into the air, carrying them through the clouds toward a destination that had seemed impossibly distant moments before. Anor Londo appeared through the mist like a dream given form. The city of the gods gleamed under what appeared to be a setting sun, its white granite and golden spires radiating majesty that surpassed anything the chosen undead had witnessed. Giant architecture rose in every direction. Grand bridges connected towering structures. The entire city seemed designed to inspire awe in anyone who looked upon it, and it succeeded completely. Yet something was wrong. Anor Londo was eerily quiet. The streets that should have bustled with divine activity stood empty. Only a few sentinel giants patrolled the courtyards, massive constructs that attacked intruders on sight. Winged demons lingered at transport points, ready to carry travelers between the city's levels. But there were no gods, no citizens, no evidence that anyone actually lived here anymore. The splendor remained, but it felt hollow. The chosen undead was walking through a monument to something that had ended long ago, a city preserved in amber while its inhabitants had scattered to the winds. The sunlight that bathed everything in golden warmth was beautiful, but it could not hide the emptiness beneath. The goal in Anor Londo was clear. The chosen undead needed to obtain the Lord Vessel from Princess Guinevere's chamber. This artifact would be essential for the next phase of the prophecy, allowing access to areas that remained sealed. But reaching Guinevere required navigating the city's heights and defeating whatever guardians remained. A friendly giant blacksmith offered assistance along the way, reinforcing weapons and armor for the battles ahead. The chosen undead would need every advantage possible. The cathedral at the heart of Anor Londo housed dangers that had defeated countless challengers before. Navigating the cathedral meant traversing rafters high above the floor, fighting painting guardians who protected a mysterious giant painting. This artwork contained the painted world of Ariamis, a separate realm where Priscilla the crossbreed had been hidden away. Entering this painted world was possible for those who carried a peculiar doll, but it was not necessary for the main quest. The painted world held its own secrets and treasures, a hidden corner of lore that rewarded curiosity. The primary challenge waited in the cathedral's throne room. Two legendary warriors stood guard over the passage to Guinevere's chamber, and they had been defending this post since before the gods departed. Dragonslayer Ornstein was one of Gwyn's 4 knights, swift and deadly with lightning-infused attacks. Executioner Small was a massive figure wielding a great hammer, slow but devastatingly powerful. The battle against Ornstein and Smell became one of the most difficult tests the chosen undead had faced. Fighting two opponents simultaneously required constant awareness of both threats. Ornstein darted around the arena with lethal speed, while Smaug's hammer strikes could end a fight in seconds. Separating them was nearly impossible. Surviving long enough to defeat one was an achievement in itself. When one of the duo finally fell, the survivor absorbed his comrade's strength. Ornstein grew larger and more powerful if Smaug fell first. Smaug gained electrical attacks if Ornstein was defeated first. Either way, the second phase of the battle was even harder than the first. Some summoned Solaire to help even the odds, turning a 2-against-1 situation into something more manageable. Victory came eventually, though it was earned through persistence and skill. Both legendary warriors fell, and the great doors beyond opened to reveal what waited in the chamber beyond. Princess Guinevere sat in a brilliantly lit room, a colossal and gentle figure bathed in warm light. She appeared exactly as legends described, radiating divine beauty and compassion. She commended the chosen undead for their courage in reaching her, and spoke of the hope that they might succeed Lord Gwyn in his sacred duty. Guinevere granted the chosen undead the Lord Vessel, a grand golden chalice designed to hold powerful souls. This artifact was exactly what the prophecy required. With it, the chosen undead could access the sealed domains where the remaining Lord souls resided. The bestowal of the Lord Vessel marked the chosen undead as the chosen successor to Gwyn, at least according to those who served the interests of the Age of Fire. What the chosen undead likely did not realize was that this Guinevere was not real. The true princess had departed Anor Londo ages ago. What sat in this chamber was an illusion crafted by Gwyndolin, the last god remaining in the city. The warm light, the gentle words, the magnificent appearance were all fabrications designed to guide undead toward linking the fire. If someone attacked the illusion, it would disperse and Anor Londo would plunge into darkness. The artificial sunlight would vanish, replaced by the cold moonlight that represented the city's true state. Gwyndolin would reveal himself as hostile, defending the deception he had maintained for so long. But most who reached this chamber accepted what they saw without question. The illusion persisted, and the storyline continued as Gwyn's followers had intended. The chosen undead returned to Firelink Shrine bearing the Lord Vessel. King Seeker Frampt waited there, the massive primordial serpent who had awakened when the bells were rung. He congratulated the undead on obtaining the sacred artifact and explained what needed to happen next. Frampt identified himself as a close friend of Lord Gwyn, a serpent who had served the gods since ancient times. He urged the chosen undead to fill the Lord Vessel with powerful souls and succeed Lord Gwyn by linking the fire. This would perpetuate the Age of Fire, extending the cycle that had begun when Gwyn threw himself into the flame. The Lord Vessel needed to be placed on an altar hidden beneath Firelink Shrine. Frampt offered to carry the chosen undead down a spiraling pit to the Firelink chamber where this altar waited. Once the vessel was placed, the next phase of the journey could begin. There was another path, though many never discovered it. If the chosen undead had defeated the four kings before placing the Lord Vessel, they would have encountered Darkstalker Carther in the Abyss. This serpent offered a very different perspective. Carther claimed that Frampt was a deceiver, that linking the fire was a mistake that robbed humanity of their rightful Age of Dark. He encouraged letting the flame die, rather than perpetuating the cycle. Carthy offered to place the Lord Vessel as well, serving as an alternative guide for those who chose darkness over fire. The choice between serpents represented the fundamental decision the chosen undead would eventually face. But regardless of which serpent was trusted, the Lord Vessel needed to be placed and filled with Lord souls. Upon placing the Lord Vessel at the altar, golden fog barriers throughout Lordran dissolved. Areas that had been sealed became accessible. The entry to Nito's tomb opened. The door to Lost Izalith unlocked. The barrier blocking the depths of New Londo faded. The path to Seth's domain in the Crystal Archives became passable. The chosen undead now had access to the 4 remaining targets. Gravelord Nito in his tomb beneath the catacombs. The bed of chaos that had once been the Witch of Izalith. The 4 kings trapped in the flooded ruins of New Londo. Saith the Scaleless in his archives and crystal cave. Each of these beings held a lord soul or a fragment of one. Each needed to be defeated and their souls claimed for the Lord Vessel. The quest became open-ended. The chosen undead could pursue these targets in any order, though some paths were harder than others. Armed with the abilities gained through the journey so far, and perhaps the power to warp between bonfires, the hero prepared to venture into the most dangerous regions of Lordran. The true test of resolve was about to begin. 4 of the most powerful beings remaining in the world stood between the chosen undead and the kiln of the first flame. Each represented a different aspect of the tragedy that had befallen Gwyn's age. Each would need to fall before the final choice could be made. The Lord Vessel waited to be filled. The flame waited to be linked or abandoned. And the chosen undead stood at the threshold of the endgame, ready to collect the souls that would determine the fate of the world. The path to the first Lord's soul led down into absolute darkness. Gravelord Nito had claimed the soul of death when the first flame ignited, becoming the first of the dead and master of everything that followed endings. Since then, he had retreated to the deepest places beneath Lordran, ruling over bones and shadows in the tomb of the giants. He had played his role in the war against dragons, unleashing disease and decay upon enemies whose scales had been broken. But after Gwyn established his age, Nito had withdrawn from the affairs of the surface world, content to preside over his underground kingdom of the deceased. Now the chosen undead needed his Lord's soul to fill the Lord Vessel. The journey to claim it would be one of the most harrowing of the entire pilgrimage. The catacombs served as the entrance to Nito's domain, a winding underground cemetery that had been accumulating the remains of the dead for centuries. This was not a peaceful resting place. The bones here did not stay still. Skeletons reassembled and attacked anyone who disturbed the quiet, pulling themselves together again and again unless their animating source was destroyed. Necromancers lurked throughout the catacombs, occult practitioners who gave the skeletons their unnatural motion. As long as these necromancers lived, the skeletons they controlled would keep reforming no matter how many times they were struck down. The chosen undead learned quickly that destroying the source was more important than fighting the symptoms. Holy weapons could also prevent the reassembly, severing the connection between bone and dark magic. The terrain itself posed constant danger. Narrow ledges overlooked bottomless drops. Spinning bone wheel skeletons rolled through corridors at lethal speeds, their circular forms gaining momentum until they could flatten anything in their path. Traps waited around corners, designed to punish anyone who moved without caution through these halls of the dead. Deep in the catacombs, the chosen undead encountered something unexpected. Pinwheel was a peculiar necromancer with 3 faces, a being who had stolen power that rightfully belonged to Nito himself. Specifically, Pinwheel had taken the rite of kindling, a sacred ability that allowed bonfires to be strengthened beyond their normal limits. Despite Pinwheel's menacing appearance, the creature was relatively weak compared to the challenges the chosen undead had already overcome. The battle ended quickly, and the rite of kindling passed to its new owner. This power allowed bonfires throughout Lordran to grant more uses of the Estus flask, a significant advantage for the trials ahead. Taking this right from Pinwheel also weakened whatever hold Nito maintained over the upper reaches of his domain. Beyond the catacombs lay the tomb of the giants, and the tomb was darkness made physical. The chosen undead needed a light source to navigate this place. A lantern or magical illumination was essential because the tomb was pitch black without assistance. Even with light, visibility extended only a few feet in any direction. The oppressive shadow seemed to swallow illumination, fighting against any attempt to see what lurked in the depths. Giant skeletons rose from the shadows without warning, far larger than the ones in the catacombs above. Skeletal beasts prowled the darkness, attacking with speed that their bony forms should not have allowed. Every step forward was a gamble against unseen dangers. During the descent, the chosen undead encountered Patches the hyena, a trickster whose reputation preceded him. Patches lured the hero toward the edge of a pit under the pretense of showing them treasure below. When the chosen undead drew close enough, Patches kicked them into the darkness, laughing as they fell. Surviving the fall was only the beginning of the problems this betrayal caused. The pit below was filled with giant skeleton archers whose arrows flew through the darkness with deadly accuracy. The chosen undead had to fight their way out of a trap they had walked into willingly, punished for trusting someone in a world where trust was rarely rewarded. In this pit, depending on when the chosen undead arrived, they might find Rayar of Thorolund. This maiden from the Way of White had come to the catacombs on a holy mission to retrieve the rite of kindling. She had traveled with 2 knight companions, Nico and Vince, who served as her bodyguards. Their escort had been Patches himself. The mission had gone terribly wrong. Patches had betrayed them just as he betrayed the chosen undead. The undead creatures of the tomb had attacked the party. By the time the chosen undead discovered Rayar, her 2 knights had succumbed to the curse and gone hollow. They attacked their former charge, forcing the chosen undead to destroy them if Rayar was to be saved. Rescuing Rayar meant ending Nico and Vince, former protectors who had become mindless threats. The cruelty of the curse spared no one, not even the pious servants of the gods. Rayar, if saved, would return to the undead parish to continue her mission, grateful but scarred by what had happened in the darkness. Her story was a reminder that faith alone could not protect anyone from the reality of the undead curse. Patches could be confronted after the chosen undead climbed out of the pit. Some chose to end him for his treachery. Others spared him, perhaps seeing use in keeping a trickster alive who might become a merchant later. If forgiven, Patches eventually made his way to Firelink Shrine, completely unapologetic for his actions, but willing to sell useful items to anyone with souls to spend. The descent continued through absolute darkness. The chosen undead climbed down coffins and navigated ledges illuminated only by phosphorescent moss or the glow of a skull lantern. The deeper they went, the more the world above seemed to fade away. This was Nito's true domain, a place where death held absolute dominion. The lowest crypt was an ossuary known as the Gravelord's Tomb, a cavern so filled with bones that the floor itself was made of skeletal remains. Entering this final arena triggered a fall into the pit where Nito waited, a drop that committed the chosen undead to whatever happened next. Gravelord Nito emerged from a giant coffin at the far end of the cavern. He was not a single being, but a mass of skeletons fused together into one looming form. Skulls and rib cages jutted from his body at impossible angles. He carried a sword large enough to cleave through stone, and his presence radiated the same death energy he had wielded since the war against dragons. At the start of the battle, Nito remained passive, waiting for the challenger to approach. This moment of stillness was deceptive. The instant combat began, smaller skeleton warriors rose from the bones carpeting the floor. Nito could animate these minions continuously, creating an endless stream of distractions while he prepared his own attacks. The Gravelord's signature move was devastating. Spikes of death energy erupted from the ground without warning, impaling anyone standing in the wrong place. This sword dance attack could strike multiple times in succession, punishing anyone who did not recognize the signs and move quickly enough. The darkness of the arena made spotting these attacks even harder. Fighting Nito required managing multiple threats simultaneously. The skeleton minions needed to be destroyed with divine weapons to prevent their constant revival. Nito himself needed to be attacked during the windows between his devastating area attacks. The combination of swarming enemies and powerful single-target strikes made this one of the more complex battles the Chosen Undead had faced. But the Chosen Undead had not come this far to fail in the darkness. Through persistence and skill, they brought Gravelord Nito down. The first of the dead fell to one who could not stay dead. The being who had commanded death since the dawn of disparity finally experienced an ending of his own. Upon defeat, Nito dissolved into a pile of bones, his form collapsing without the soul that had held it together. The Chosen Undead claimed the Lord's soul from his remains, one of the 4 great souls needed to fill the Lord vessel. The soul of Gravelord Nito joined the collection that would eventually unlock the path to the kiln of the first flame. Nito had been a being who willingly chose isolation. He had stayed in the shadows of his tomb, indifferent to the struggles happening above. His death might have subtle effects on the world, perhaps weakening the concept of death itself in ways that would not become obvious for some time. But in practical terms, 1/4 of the Lord Vessel's requirement was now met. The Chosen Undead departed the now quiet tomb, leaving behind the bones of countless dead and the remains of their former master. The darkness that had made this place so treacherous remained, but it no longer held the same menace. The Lord of this realm was gone. The shadows were just shadows now. 3 more Lord souls waited to be claimed. The Lord Vessel hungered for completion, and the path to the final choice drew closer with each victory. Seath the Scaleless had never forgotten that he was born different. The albino dragon who betrayed his own kind during the war had been rewarded handsomely by Gwyn, a title of Duke, a massive archive fortress near Anor Londo, a fragment of Gwyn's own Lord's soul, treatment as nobility despite not being born among the gods. Seath had received everything a traitor could hope for, and he had spent the centuries since pursuing one obsession above all others: immortality. True immortality, the kind his dragon brethren had possessed through their stone scales. The scales Seath had been born without. His entire existence revolved around finding a way to achieve what nature had denied him. And in his research, he had found something that came close enough. The primordial crystal granted Seath invulnerability. As long as this artifact remained intact, no weapon could truly harm him. He had achieved a form of the immortality he craved, though it depended on an external source rather than his own body. This was good enough for Seath. He continued his research in the Duke's archives, conducting experiments that grew more horrific as the centuries passed. Now the Chosen Undead needed the Lord's soul shard that Seath possessed. The path to claim it led back to Anor Londo, where a golden fog door had previously blocked passage to the archives. With the Lord Vessel placed, this barrier had dissolved. The way to Seath's domain stood open. The Duke's archives were a massive library fortress filled with knowledge accumulated over ages of research. Crystal-powered channelers patrolled the halls, robed sorcerers who served Seath and wielded magic derived from his studies. Heavily armored crystal soldiers guarded key passages, their bodies infused with the same crystalline energy that permeated the entire structure. The chosen undead ascended through the archive tower, fighting past channelers and soldiers while navigating the labyrinthine corridors. The architecture grew stranger the higher they climbed, with crystal formations jutting from walls and floors in patterns that seemed almost organic. Eventually, they reached a grand library with an elevator leading upward to a crystal cave. Here, the chosen undead confronted Seath the Scaleless for the first time. The encounter went badly. Seath was invulnerable. The primordial crystal protected him completely, making every attack useless. The chosen undead's weapons bounced off his pale flesh without leaving marks. Meanwhile, Seath unleashed his power without restraint. His massive tentacled form moved with surprising speed. His crystal breath could curse anyone it touched, transforming flesh into brittle crystal. This first encounter was designed to be unwinnable. The chosen undead could not defeat Seath while the primordial crystal remained intact, and they did not yet know where to find it. Overwhelmed by the albino dragon's assault, they fell. But this defeat was not the end. It was simply part of the story. The chosen undead awoke as a prisoner in a cell within the Duke's Archives prison tower. Seath had neutralized the threat rather than destroying it completely, perhaps out of curiosity about this persistent undead, or simply following the routine of capturing intruders for later experimentation. The cell was guarded by channelers and patrolled by strange, serpent-headed wardens. The lower levels of the prison held horrors that revealed the true nature of Seath's research. Pisaka monsters roamed the corridors, grotesque creatures that had once been human women. Seath's experiments had transformed them into squirming octopus-like horrors, failed attempts to understand the nature of souls and scales. These pitiful beings attacked anything that moved, incapable of remembering what they had been before Seath's cruelty remade them. An alarm sounded throughout the prison, alerting guards to the escape attempt. The chosen undead broke out of their cell, using a key that had been conveniently left nearby, or through skill at picking locks. They fought through the prison tower, stopping the alarm and dispatching the Snake Men jailers who responded to it. Big Hat Logan might be found here as well, if he had been freed from Sen's fortress earlier. The Master Sorcerer had traveled to the archives seeking Seath's knowledge, drawn by the promise of powerful magic. He had been captured just as the chosen undead had been. Freeing Logan allowed him to continue his studies and teach high-level sorceries to anyone willing to learn, but his obsession with Seath's secrets would eventually consume him. Given enough time, Logan would go mad from the knowledge he acquired, eventually believing himself to be Seath and needing to be put down like any other hollow. The chosen undead climbed out of the prison tower and re-entered the main archives. They now understood that Seath could not be defeated through direct assault alone. Something protected him, and that something needed to be destroyed before the true fight could begin. The main archive library was a multi-story maze designed to confuse and frustrate intruders. Moving staircases shifted between positions, opening and closing paths depending on their orientation. Hidden passages led to unexpected areas. The chosen undead navigated this puzzle while fighting through crystal hollows and more channelers, rotating giant bookshelf mechanisms to create new routes forward. Eventually, they reached a teleporter crystal that transported them to the crystal cave, Seath's true lair. This cave was breathtaking and deadly in equal measure. Gigantic crystals jutted from every surface, refracting light into rainbow patterns that dazzled the eyes. But the true danger lay in the walkways themselves. Many paths through the cave were invisible, crystal bridges that could only be detected by watching where snowflake-like crystal particles fell. Step wrong, and the chosen undead would plummet into the depths below. Moonlight, butterflies fluttered through the cavern, beautiful creatures that were byproducts of Seath's experiments. They attacked with magical projectiles, adding another hazard to an already treacherous environment. The chosen undead carefully traversed the transparent paths, following the falling crystal flakes to safety while dealing with any butterflies that drew too close. At the bottom of the cave, a pale fog door marked the entrance to Seath's inner sanctum. Beyond it lay a crystal-laden chamber with a large pink crystal glowing at the far end. This was the primordial crystal, the source of Seath's immortality. As long as it remained intact, the dragon could not be harmed. The first order of business was obvious. The battle began the moment the chosen undead entered the chamber. But instead of engaging Seath directly, they rushed to the primordial crystal and struck it with everything they had. The crystal shattered under their assault, and Seath let out a screech of pain and rage. His invincibility was undone. For the first time since he had acquired the crystal, Seath was vulnerable. The true fight began now. Seath was a gigantic pale dragon whose body bristled with tentacled appendages where his missing scales should have been. He attacked with sorcery and physical strikes, using his bulk to crush anyone who stood too close. His crystal breath remained his most dangerous weapon, creating areas of cursed ground that could transform the chosen undead into crystal if they lingered too long. The chamber became a battlefield of dodging and striking. The chosen undead avoided the areas Seath crystallized while looking for openings to attack. Some warriors targeted his tail, eventually severing one of his rear appendages and claiming the legendary Moonlight Greatsword from the remains. Others focused purely on ending the fight as quickly as possible. After a challenging confrontation, Seath the Scaleless finally fell. The traitor dragon let out a final wail as his body collapsed, disintegrating into white dust and crystal fragments. Centuries of accumulated knowledge and horrific experiments ended with him. The channelers lost their master. The Pisakas no longer had anyone directing their torment. The Duke's archives fell quiet for the first time since Gwyn had granted them to his treacherous ally. In a strange way, the chosen undead had avenged the everlasting dragons by destroying the one who had betrayed them. Seath's treachery had made Gwyn's victory possible. Now Seath paid for that treachery with his existence, brought down by someone carrying out Gwyn's own design. The irony was not lost on those who understood the history. The bequeathed Lord Soul Shard that Seath had possessed now belonged to the chosen undead. This was a large piece of Gwyn's own Lord Soul, granted to the dragon long ago as reward for his service. It counted toward filling the Lord Vessel, just as the other Lord Souls did, bringing the chosen undead one step closer to unlocking the path to the kiln. 2 Lord Souls had been claimed. 2 more remained. The Lord Vessel grew heavier with each addition, the power it contained building toward the moment when the final door would open. The chosen undead departed the crystal cave, leaving behind the remains of a dragon who had spent eternity chasing immortality, only to lose everything to someone who could not stay gone no matter how many times they fell. The drowned city held secrets that had been buried for centuries. New Londo had been sacrificed to contain the abyss, its streets flooded and its people drowned to prevent something worse from spreading across Lordran. The 4 kings who had ruled there still existed in some form, trapped in the darkness they had embraced. Their Lord's soul fragment waited in the depths, but claiming it would require preparation that no other target demanded. The abyss was not simply darkness. It was a void that consumed anything unprepared to enter it. Stepping into that lightless expanse without protection meant instant destruction, swallowed by nothingness without hope of return. Only one artifact in all of Lordran could grant safe passage through that void. The Covenant of Artorias was a ring that had belonged to one of Gwyn's greatest knights. Artorias the Abyss Walker had worn it during his mission to Ulasil, using its power to traverse the darkness that had consumed that kingdom. After his fall, the ring had been left at his grave in Darkroot Garden, guarded by the one companion who had never abandoned him. Great Grey Wolf Sif protected his master's resting place with fierce devotion. The massive wolf had been shielded from corruption by Artorias' final act, and he had remained at the grave ever since, waiting for anyone who might try to claim what lay within. The chosen undead had encountered Sif earlier in their journey, a noble creature defending a fallen hero's memory. The battle against Sif was tinged with sorrow. This was not a monster or a corrupted being. This was a loyal companion performing the duty his master had left him. But the chosen undead needed the covenant of Artorias to proceed, and Sif would not surrender it willingly. With reluctance, the undead fought the great wolf and eventually emerged victorious, claiming the ring that would allow them to walk in the abyss. Now, equipped with this protection, the chosen undead turned their attention to New Lundo ruins. An elevator near Firelink Shrine descended to what remained of the flooded city. The ruins were dark and waterlogged, streets submerged beneath murky water that hid the true extent of the devastation. But the water was not the primary danger. The restless spirits of New Londo's citizens still haunted these ruins, ghosts of the men, women, and children who had drowned when the floodgates opened. These ghosts could not be harmed by normal means. They were incorporeal, passing through weapons and armor as if they did not exist. Only those who carried a transient curse or wielded a cursed weapon could interact with them physically. Without such preparation, the ghosts would swarm with their sharp spectral blades, tearing apart anyone foolish enough to enter their domain unprotected. The chosen undead moved carefully through shattered buildings and flooded passages, fighting the ghostly remnants of a city that had been sacrificed for the greater good. These spirits held no malice beyond their nature. They simply attacked anything living that disturbed their eternal vigil, unable to remember who they had been or why they were trapped here. Atop a church overlooking the ruins stood Ingwood, one of the 3 healers who had made the terrible decision to flood New Lundo. He had remained here ever since, standing vigil over the seal that kept the water in place. His purpose was to ensure that the abyss stayed contained, that the sacrifice of an entire city was not rendered meaningless by someone releasing what lay below. When the chosen undead approached, Ingwood recognized their purpose. He understood that the 4 kings needed to be defeated if the world was to have any hope of continuing. He gave the chosen undead the key to the seal, the means to open the floodgates and drain the water that had filled New Lundo for so long. The chosen undead used this key on a massive lever mechanism that controlled the water gates. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The floodgates opened and water poured out of New Lundo in a torrent, draining away to reveal what had been hidden beneath. The lower valleys and pits of the city emerged from the depths, areas that had not been seen since the day of the flood. What the water revealed was a graveyard. Rotted corpses littered the newly exposed streets, the remains of residents who had been sacrificed to contain the abyss. These people had not been given time to escape. The flood had come without warning, drowning everyone in its path to ensure the darkness did not spread further. Their bodies had remained submerged ever since, preserved by the cold water until this moment. New dangers emerged with the drained ruins. The lower levels were crawling with dark wraiths, the knights of the 4 kings who had embraced darkness alongside their masters. These spectral warriors still served the abyss, attacking anyone who ventured into their territory. Their dark hand attacks could drain humanity from living victims, and their wicked blades struck with the weight of centuries of corruption. The chosen undead fought through these tomb-dark ruins, battling dark wraiths at every turn. Old treasures emerged from the drained areas, including the very large ember that would enable the highest level of weapon upgrades. But the primary goal remained ahead, deeper in the ruins, where the entrance to the abyss itself waited. At the lowest point of New Londo, a fog gate marked the entrance to what had once been the king's palace. Beyond that gate was only void, a foreboding darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. The chosen undead equipped the Covenant of Artorias, ensuring the ring's protection was active. Without it, what came next would mean instant oblivion. The chosen undead stepped through the fog and jumped into the great black pit. They fell through darkness, descending into an area with no discernible features, no floor, no walls, no ceiling, just an endless void called the abyss. Eventually they landed on something solid, though it was impossible to see what. The only light came from the chosen undead themselves, and whatever emerged from the darkness to challenge them. The four kings appeared one by one, emerging from the void as spectral armored figures. The abyss had distorted them beyond recognition, transforming the human lords who had once ruled New Londo into something barely resembling their former selves. Each king wielded a massive sword and commanded soul magic that burned with purple fire. The battle was surreal and desperate. The chosen undead fought in complete darkness, judging distance only by the approaching glow of each king. The kings attacked with heavy sword combinations, with grab moves that drained humanity from their victim, with homing magical blasts that tracked across the void. And despite being called the Four Kings, more could spawn if the fight dragged on too long. Speed was essential. The chosen undead needed to defeat each king as quickly as possible before the next one joined the battle. Being overwhelmed by multiple kings at once made victory nearly impossible. Every second counted, every strike needed to land, every dodge needed to succeed. Eventually, through persistence and skill, the chosen undead vanquished all of the four kings. The abyssal void seemed to calm as the last one fell, the darkness becoming less oppressive without the kings to anchor it. The bequeathed Lord Soul Shard that the four kings had possessed passed to the chosen undead, another piece of Gwyn's soul that had been bestowed on these human lords and then tainted by their embrace of darkness. With the four kings defeated, the curse that had bound New Londo was effectively lifted. The dark wraiths lost their masters. The abyss that had threatened to consume everything remained contained but weakened. The sacrifice of an entire city had been validated by this final victory over the beings who had made that sacrifice necessary. For some, defeating the four kings before placing the Lord Vessel led to an unexpected encounter. Dark Stalker Kath, the primordial serpent who had corrupted the kings in the first place, appeared from the shadows of the abyss. Unlike Frampt, Kath did not congratulate the chosen undead on serving Gwyn's legacy. He offered something entirely different. Kath explained that Gwyn's linking of the fire had been a mistake, an unnatural prolonging of an age that should have ended naturally. The true progression of the world was toward the Age of Dark, an era when humanity would inherit what the gods had denied them. The dark soul that lived within every human was meant to rise, not to be suppressed forever by an artificially maintained flame. Kath sought a Dark Lord, a human strong enough to claim their birthright and lead humanity into this new age. He told the chosen undead that they could be that Dark Lord if they chose to let the fire die rather than link it. He offered to help place the Lord Vessel, serving as an alternative to Frampt for those who wished to pursue the ending Kath represented. The choice between serpents represented the fundamental decision the chosen undead would eventually face. Frampt served Gwyn's agenda, seeking to perpetuate the cycle of fire. Kath served the darkness, wanting to end that cycle and usher in humanity's age. Both serpents offered guidance, but their goals were completely opposed. If the chosen undead had already placed the Lord Vessel with Frampt, Kath would not appear. The choice had already been made, at least symbolically. But even those who never met Kath could still choose the Dark Lord ending when the final moment came. The serpents guided the path, but they did not determine the destination. Regardless of which serpent the chosen undead allied with, the fact remained that 3 Lord souls had been claimed. Nito's soul of death, Seath's fragment of Gwyn's power, the 4 Kings' tainted shard from the abyss. Only one more soul was needed to fill the Lord Vessel and unlock the path to the kiln of the first flame. The Witch of Izalith waited in the depths of lost Izalith, transformed into the bed of chaos by her failed attempt to create a new flame. Her Lord's soul was the last piece of the puzzle. Once it was claimed, the final choice would be at hand. The last Lord's soul waited in the place where everything had gone wrong. Lost Izalith was where the witch had tried to create a new first flame, and instead birthed the chaos that had plagued the world ever since. Her Lord's soul remained fused with the monstrous growth she had become, the bed of chaos that continued spawning demons even after centuries. To complete the Lord Vessel and unlock the path to the kiln, the chosen undead needed to descend into that hellscape and end what Gwyn's forces had failed to destroy. The path to Lost Izalith led through the demon ruins, an area of molten lava beneath the domain where Quelag had guarded the second bell. After ringing that bell, a new route had opened deeper into the volcanic depths. The chosen undead descended into ruins that radiated heat capable of melting armor and flesh alike. The first obstacle was Ceaseless Discharge, an enormous lava demon whose titanic form blocked further progress. This creature was actually one of the witch's children, transformed by the chaos flame into something barely recognizable. Defeating Ceaseless required either direct combat or cunning, luring the demon to a position where it could fall into the abyss below. When Ceaseless fell, the lava levels throughout the area lowered, allowing passage to places that had been inaccessible before. The ruins were populated by demons spawned from the chaos flame, creatures that had once seemed like unique horrors but now appeared as common enemies. Capra demons and Taurus demons roamed freely, the same types of beings the chosen undead had faced as bosses earlier in their journey. What had once been terrifying was now merely dangerous, a sign of how far the chosen undead had come. The demon fire sage blocked the path deeper into Izalith. This creature resembled the asylum demon from the very beginning of the journey, but wreathed in flames and far more powerful. The battle was intense but manageable for someone who had already claimed 3 Lord Souls. The fire sage fell, and the way forward opened. Beyond the fire sage lay boiling lava fields that could not be safely traversed without special equipment. The orange charred ring, obtainable from one of the witch's transformed daughters, allowed passage through the molten rock. Without it, the chosen undead would need to endure tremendous damage just to cross, tanking the heat through sheer determination and healing. Titanite demons bounded through the lava fields, adding mobile threats to an already hostile environment. The chosen undead fought or avoided these creatures while making their way toward a ruined chaos temple that offered temporary refuge. Here, another daughter of chaos waited, her presence a reminder that not everything born from the witch's mistake was hostile. Solaire of Astora might be encountered again in this area, still searching for the sun he believed would give his existence meaning. But something terrible could happen to the cheerful knight if the chosen undead had not taken specific precautions. A swarm of chaos bugs infested part of the path to Lost Izalith, and one of them carried a parasite called the sunlight maggot. If Solaire found this bug before the chosen undead eliminated it, the parasite would attach itself to him and drive him mad. The knight who had been such a reliable ally throughout the journey would become another enemy, forcing the chosen undead to fight someone who had helped them survive countless battles. This was one of the cruelest twists the journey could take, turning friendship into tragedy. Those who saved Solaire by destroying the chaos bugs before he reached them preserved the possibility of his aid in the final battle. His summoning sign would appear before the last confrontation, allowing the sun-seeking knight to join the chosen undead one more time. But many never realized this was possible. Encountering Solaire as a hollow shell of his former self and having no choice but to end him. Lost Izalith itself was a nightmarish ruin, half sunk in lava. The ancient city where the witch had once ruled was now a wasteland of crumbling buildings and mutated flora. Grotesque creatures called Chaos Eaters prowled the streets, stone dragons warped by the same flame that had transformed everything else in this place. A shortcut existed for those who had joined the Chaos Servant Covenant by offering humanity to Quelag's sickly sister. This path bypassed much of the dangerous main route and allowed access to the Chaos Bug Swarm before Solaire could reach it. But most chosen undead traveled the harder way, fighting through whatever stood between them and the bed of chaos. Near the heart of Izalith, the chosen undead finally saw what they had come to destroy. The bed of chaos was a massive growth of tangled roots and glowing fire that had taken root in the witch's former hall. It was not a creature in any conventional sense. It was almost an environment, a living hazard that required a completely different approach than any previous battle. The fight against the bed of chaos was unlike anything else in the journey. The chosen undead entered through a fog gate to find an enormous mutated tree with flaming branches dominating the chamber. The bed of chaos swept giant arms across the arena and created sinkholes in the floor that could drop careless fighters to their deaths. Two orbs protected by gnarled roots flanked the central mass, one on each side. These orbs of chaos needed to be destroyed before the core could be reached. The chosen undead had to navigate the constantly shifting battlefield, dodging sweeping attacks while cutting through the tangled branches that shielded each orb. One by one, the orbs were shattered. Each orb apparently contained one of the witch's daughters, sacrificed to shield the core of what their mother had become. Destroying them meant ending whatever remained of those children, freeing them from an existence that was neither life nor death. With each orb shattered, the bed of chaos became more aggressive, its attacks more frantic, the floor collapsing in larger sections. After both side orbs were destroyed, the protective fire around the center extinguished. Now came the most dangerous part. The chosen undead needed to make a daring sprint and leap into the center of the bed of chaos, where the core lay exposed. The floor continued giving way. The fiery arms continued thrashing. One mistake meant falling to death and starting the entire encounter over. The chosen undead navigated the collapsing floor and jumped into the heart of the growth. Inside the innermost roots, they found the core of the bed of chaos. It was a small, withered creature that resembled a bug or a shriveled humanoid, barely recognizable as anything that had once been powerful or proud. This was all that remained of the Witch of Izalith, reduced to a pathetic remnant clinging to existence within the monster she had created. With a strike or two, the chosen undead ended what remained of the witch. The effect was immediate and total. The entire bed of chaos died the instant its core was destroyed. The flaming branches went dark. The thrashing stopped. The chaotic fire that had burned for centuries finally went out. The chosen undead claimed the soul of the bed of chaos, which was the witch of Izalith's original Lord soul, transformed by the disaster she had caused. This was the final piece needed to fill the Lord vessel. all four great souls were now in hand. Lost, Izalith fell silent, except for the distant crackle of remaining lava pools. The source of demons had been cut off. No more would spawn from the bed of chaos, though those already wandering the world would continue to exist. The age of demons, born from the witch's mistake, was effectively ended. Quilana of Izalith, the surviving daughter who had escaped the initial disaster and taught pyromancy in Blighttown, might appear to acknowledge what had happened. She had watched from afar for centuries, unable to end her mother's suffering herself. With the bed of chaos destroyed, she thanked the chosen undead implicitly for freeing her mother from that twisted existence. Then she quietly disappeared from the world, her purpose finally complete. The fair lady, Quelag's sickly sister, who had remained in Blighttown, was unaware of these events. She continued her quiet existence, blind to the fate of the mother who had been transformed so long ago. Some things in this world passed without notice, even events that should have mattered greatly. The chosen undead departed Lost Izalith, carrying the final Lord's soul. The journey had taken them through darkness and fire, through flooded ruins and crystal caves, through tombs of bone and voids of shadow. They had claimed the souls of Nito, Seath, the Four Kings, and the Witch of Izalith. The Lord Vessel could now be filled completely. The path to the kiln of the first flame lay open at last. Frampt or Kath had guided the chosen undead to this moment, each serpent hoping the final choice would favor their agenda. The age of fire or the age of dark hung in the balance. Everything had led to this. Only Gwyn remained. The Lord of Cinder, who had started everything by throwing himself into the flame, waited in the kiln, reduced to a hollow shell of his former glory. The chosen undead would face him next, and what happened after that would determine the fate of the entire world. Everything came down to this moment. The chosen undead returned to the Firelink altar beneath Firelink Shrine, carrying the weight of four great souls. The Lord Vessel sat waiting on its altar, ready to receive what had been gathered through blood and perseverance. Nito's soul of death, Seath's fragment of stolen power, the Four Kings' shard tainted by darkness, the witch's soul fused with the chaos she had created. Each one had required a journey into nightmare. Each one had tested the limits of what the chosen undead could endure. The souls were offered to the Lord Vessel. In a brilliant display of light, the golden chalice devoured the power contained within them, filling until it overflowed with radiance. The energy released was enough to shatter the seal that had protected the kiln of the first flame since Gwyn's sacrifice. A giant stone slab that had stood for centuries crumbled and fell away, opening the path that had been closed to everyone except the one who could gather the Lord's souls. Frampt or Kath, whichever serpent had guided the chosen undead to this point, acknowledged the achievement. No one had accomplished this since Gwyn himself. The prophecy that had driven so many undead to their doom had finally been fulfilled by someone strong enough to see it through. But the prophecy was only half complete. The true test waited beyond the shattered seal. The kiln of the first flame lay through the newly opened gate. The chosen undead stepped into a landscape that defied easy description. This was a flame-scorched wasteland of ashy white dunes and burnt remnants. The stumps of ancient arch trees jutted from the ground like gravestones, their massive forms reduced to charred husks by the intensity of fires that had burned here long ago. Cinders fell through the air like snow, drifting silently in a place where even the wind seemed to have died. Gwyn had built this kiln as a protective shrine for the first flame. It was meant to house the fire that had sparked disparity and ended the Age of Ancients. Now it was half ruined, damaged by the very flames it had been constructed to contain. The centuries of burning had taken their toll on everything here. reducing stone to ash and memory to dust. The path to the flame wound through this desolation, and the chosen undead was not alone on it. Black knights stood guard along the spiral route, the lingering remnants of Gwyn's escort. These were the knights who had accompanied their lord on his final journey, incinerated by the blast when he linked the fire, but unable to find true rest. Their spirits wandered the kiln, attacking anyone who approached, still serving a master who no longer recognized them. One by one, the Black Knights fell. They wielded the same weapons they had carried in life, swords and axes and greatswords charred by fires that had burned for ages. Each one vanished in a puff of ash and light upon defeat, finally released from their endless vigil. The chosen undead pushed through them with the strength earned from the entire journey, dispatching the final gauntlet between the altar and the flame. The path opened into the heart of the kiln. This was a charcoal-colored ruin surrounding a small bonfire that barely flickered with life. Atop a mound of ash and burnt bones, a lone figure knelt before the dying embers. He wore tattered royal robes and a crown that had lost its luster. His beard was ashen grey. His form was wreathed in fading flame that seemed ready to extinguish at any moment. Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, the god who had built Anor Lundo and defeated the dragons. The king who had established the Age of Fire and ruled over an era of prosperity. The father who had sacrificed himself to keep the flame burning when it threatened to die. All of that was gone now. What remained was a hollowed husk, reduced to instinct and reflex by centuries of burning. The moment the chosen undead approached, Gwyn rose and attacked. There was no recognition in his eyes, no words of greeting or challenge, no acknowledgement that the being before him had accomplished what he had designed the prophecy to produce. Gwyn was beyond speech, beyond reason, beyond anything resembling the lord he had once been. He was a fierce old lion, guarding embers he could no longer understand. His greatsword was engulfed in flame, and he wielded it with ferocity that belied his withered appearance. The attacks came in relentless flurries, swings and leaps and grabs that could burn through armor and flesh. Gwyn fought like something desperate, something that had forgotten everything except the need to protect what little remained of the fire he had fed with his own soul. The battle was tragic in a way that none of the previous fights had been. This was not a monster or a corrupted being or a servant of darkness. This was the god who had started everything, reduced to a mindless guardian by the very sacrifice he had made to save his age. The music that accompanied the fight was somber, a melancholy reflection of what had been lost rather than a triumphant anthem of conflict. The chosen undead fought Gwyn with everything they had learned. Some parried his swift blows, using the openings created to strike back. Others dodged and countered, wearing him down through patience and precision. The Lord of Cinder was powerful, but he was also hollow. His attacks were fierce but predictable, the movements of something operating on instinct. Eventually, the final blow landed. Gwyn let out a fading groan as his cinder form collapsed, the flame that had sustained him finally dying out. The Lord of Cinder fell for the last time, his endless vigil finally complete. Whatever remained of the god who had shaped the world passed on, leaving only ash where a legend had knelt. The chosen undead stood before the first flame itself. It burned faintly in its pit of ash, barely more than embers. This was the fire that had sparked disparity and ended the age of ancients. This was the source of the Lord's souls and the power of the gods. This was what Gwyn had sacrificed himself to preserve, what the prophecy had been designed to perpetuate. And now it needed fuel again. Two choices waited in this moment, two paths that would determine the fate of the world. The first choice was to continue Gwyn's legacy. The chosen undead could approach the first flame and offer themselves as the new fuel, sacrificing their soul to rekindle what was dying. Those who made this choice walked into the fire and ignited like a bonfire, their body consumed by flames that burned away everything they had been. The first flame erupted back to life, bathing the kiln in brilliant light once more. The sun in the sky intensified as the age of fire was extended for another cycle. This ending made the chosen undead the next Lord of Cinder, bound to the flame just as Gwyn had been. The prophecy was fulfilled exactly as Frampt and the followers of Gwyn had intended. The cycle would continue. The dark sign would persist. Humanity would remain cursed, but civilization would have more time under the light, more years before the darkness finally came. And eventually, far in the future, another undead would be needed to do the same thing again. The wheel would keep turning, requiring sacrifice after sacrifice to delay an ending that seemed inevitable. The second choice was to turn away from the flame entirely. The chosen undead could simply walk out of the kiln chamber after defeating Gwyn, leaving the first flame to finally die on its own. Those who made this choice watched the embers fade into darkness, the last light of the Age of Fire extinguishing after countless centuries of burning. This ending brought about the Age of Dark, the era that Gwyn had feared and delayed through his sacrifice. The chosen undead emerged from the kiln to find darkness blanketing the world. Multiple primordial serpents appeared from the shadows, bowing before the one who had let the flame die. They addressed the chosen undead as Dark Lord, acknowledging them as the ruler of this new age of humankind. What this age would bring remained uncertain. Humanity would assume power now that the gods' fire had gone out. The dark sign curse might eventually become meaningless if the cycle of fire was truly broken. But whether the Age of Dark would be an era of freedom or an era of cold and gloom was left ambiguous. The natural course of the world had been restored, but nature is not always kind. The choice between these endings defined what the prophecy truly meant. Linking the fire made the chosen undead a willing pawn of the established order, perpetuating a cycle that served the interests of beings long dead. Walking away made the chosen undead an usurper who claimed the world for humanity, ending an age that had outlived its natural span. Neither choice was presented as clearly right or wrong. Both carried consequences that would ripple through ages to come. The story of Dark Souls concluded at this juncture. The prophecy of the chosen undead had been fulfilled in every way that mattered. The bells had been rung. The Lord vessel had been filled. The Lord souls had been gathered. Gwyn had been faced. And the final choice had been made, whatever that choice was. The timeline of Dark Souls 1 encompassed the entire span of this world's history, from the primordial stagnation of the Age of Ancients, through the ignition of the First Flame and the war against dragons, through the Golden Age of Gwyn's rule and its slow decline, through catastrophe after catastrophe until the flame itself began to fade. Every major character and kingdom had played their part in the grand cycle of fire and darkness. Lordran's gods had vanished or fallen. The great powers that had once shaped the world were gone, their souls claimed by an undead who started in a cell and ended before a dying flame. The Age of Fire was either extended or extinguished, depending on a single choice made in the ruins of a kiln built to protect something that could not last forever. The world would continue in some form. Cycles would turn. Ages would rise and fall. The questions raised by the first flame would echo through time, demanding answers that might never be satisfying. But for the chosen undead, for this particular undead who escaped the asylum and traversed Lordran and gathered the Lord's souls and faced the Lord of Cinder himself, The journey was complete. One age was closing, another was beginning, and somewhere in the space between light and darkness, the story of Dark Souls found its ending.